Hello everyone, and welcome back to Little Nightmare. I'm Michael, and before we begin, I'd like to ask for a little support. Please subscribe, leave a like, and if you do, let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from. These may seem like small gestures, but they're essential for helping the channel grow and allowing me to keep bringing you these stories every night. Now, lower the volume just a bit, get comfortable, turn off the lights, and let's dive together into tonight's first story. Story 1. The corridor was too long. That was the first thing Caleb noticed, not with his mind, which was busy with the practicalities of the move, but with some deeper animal part of his brain that measured spaces by the echo of a footfall and the time it took for light to die. He stood at the head of the grand staircase, a box of kitchenware heavy in his arms, and looked down the second-floor hallway of the Overlook Hotel. It stretched, a tunnel of faded rose-patterned carpet and dark walnut wainscoting, past dozens of identical white doors, past sconces shaped like gilded claws, holding milky glass orbs, past the point where perspective should have collapsed it into a neat, manageable point. It did not collapse. It receded, endlessly. A trick of architecture that felt less like design and more like a taunt. He blinked, and for a heartbeat, the far end seemed to yawn wider, the doors shrinking, the ceiling pressing down like the roof of a mouth. Then it snapped back. Just a long hall. Just an old empty hotel. Charity? His voice left him, a dry thing, and traveled down that carpeted throat. It did not come back. They had arrived at the Overlook in the bruised hour before a mountain sunset, the sky the color of a healing wound. The hotel sat on its alpine shoulder like a crown of dead stone, its windows reflecting the dying fire of the west with a blank, mineral indifference. It was vast, a self-contained kingdom of ballrooms and banquet halls, of guest suites and service corridors, built for hundreds and now entrusted to 3. Caleb, Charity, and their 9-year-old son, Granger. The summer season had bled its last guests away. The winter, a 9-month siege of snow and silence, was theirs to manage. Keep the boilers alive. Patrol the empty rooms. Listen to the wind. Charity found him there, frozen at the head of the stairs. She touched his elbow, a gesture that had once been comfort, and now felt like checking a dial. Caleb, you're white as a sheet. Sure. This hall, he said, not looking at her. Does it seem right to you? She followed his gaze, her practical eyes scanning. It's long. They all are. Saves on builders, I suppose. One long central artery. She took the box from him, her strength always a quiet surprise. Come on. Granger's chosen his room. He says it smells like yesterday. You know how he is. Granger, the boy who collected smooth stones and arranged them in patterns that made Caleb's head ache if he looked too long. The boy who sometimes woke up speaking words in a language none of them knew, his voice thick with sleep and something else. He was a sensitive child, the doctors had said. Imaginative. High-strung. Charity called it a gift, her voice tight with a fear she would not name. Caleb, in his darker moments, thought of it as a door left ajar in his son's mind, a door through which any wind could blow. The boy's room was 217. It was, like all the others, a box of space furnished with the ghosts of vacations past, a heavy bed, a dresser, a chair upholstered in fabric worn shiny by forgotten occupants. The window looked out over the topiary garden, the hedges now shapeless hulks under the first skiff of snow. Granger stood in the center of the room, perfectly still. It's a good room, Caleb said, forcing heartiness into his voice. Big window. Granger didn't turn. The man in the corner says hello? The air in the room chilled, several degrees all at once. Caleb's gaze shot to the corner by the wardrobe. Empty. Just shadows pooling where the late light didn't reach. There's no one there, son. He's gone now, Granger said, matter of fact. He finally looked at his father, and his eyes were too old, too full of a knowing that had no business in a child's face. He was very tall, and his smile was too wide for his head. That night, the silence began. It was not an absence of sound, but a presence. A thick, velvety substance that filled the endless corridors and high-ceilinged rooms. It pressed against the eardrums. Within it you could hear the thump of your own heart, the rush of blood in your skull, and beneath that, something else. A low, rhythmic vibration, like the hum of a distant machine, or the hotel itself drawing breath. Caleb lay beside Charity in the master suite, a room grand and cold as a tomb, and listened to it. The silence had weight. It had intention. The days took on a brittle rhythm. Caleb's maintenance checks became voyages into a sunken world. The basement, with its roaring dinosaurian boilers, was a realm of dripping pipes and shifting coal dust shadows. He would feel eyes on his back, turn, and see only the empty grin of a furnace door. Tools went missing from his belt and reappeared in impossible places. A wrench laid neatly on a high lobby windowsill, a screwdriver standing upright in the center of the deserted ballroom floor. Once, in the vast kitchen, all the copper pots hanging from their rack began to sway in unison, a soft, metallic chime building to a deafening crescendo before stopping dead the moment he stumbled backwards into the hall. He told none of this to Charity. He saw the worry etching itself deeper around her mouth, the way she jumped at the settling groan of the old timbers. She clung to routine, polishing the same already gleaming banister, reading the same novel over and over without turning a page. Their conversations grew thin, spectral things. The snow's piling up on the north side. I'll check the shutters. Granger drew another picture. A pause. What of? A man made of wasps. He says the man lives in room 237. Granger was retreating into a world of whispers. He spent hours in the cavernous game room, not playing, but sitting before the dead fireplace, his head cocked, as if listening to a favorite song. He drew with a frantic, possessed energy. His pictures were not childish. They were architectural blueprints of nightmare. Cross-sections of the hotel showing rooms that hung like cysts in the walls, landscapes of a sun-bleached desert that seemed to waver behind the familiar wallpaper, portraits of the long smile man, and the lady who floats in the bathtub and isn't wet. Caleb finding one of these drawings, a detailed sketch of their own bedroom, He tore it up, his hands shaking. Granger just looked at him, not with anger, but with a profound and weary pity. The isolation became absolute. The radio died, spitting static that sometimes coalesced into a faint, laughing whisper. The phone line went dead, swallowed by the snow. They were alone in a continent of white, in a ship of wood and stone that was slowly turning against them. Caleb started drinking. The hotel cellar was a Versailles of vintage poisons. He would descend with a flashlight, its beam a frail animal in the dark, and choose a bottle at random. The wine tasted of dust and old fruit, the whiskey of smoke and regret. He drank not for pleasure, but for insulation. The alcohol stuffed cotton wool between him and the whispering silence, between him and the sight of his son's knowing eyes, between him and the terrifying vacancy in Charity's face. He began to have waking dreams. He would see a party in the grand ballroom, figures in roaring 20s finery waltzing to a phonograph he could not hear, their faces blurred and hungry. He would see a river of blood-red carpet flowing up the stairs. He would hear a small boy, not Granger, calling for his mother from behind the door of a sealed-off wing. One afternoon, chasing the phantom whine of a failing pump, he entered a short hallway on the third floor he didn't recognize. At its end was a single door, painted a fresh, glaring red. The number 237 was stenciled on it in black. Granger's room, the lady who floats. A cold, sweet smell, like spoiled perfume and standing water, seeped from under the door. He reached for the handle, It was ice cold and throbbed faintly, like a heartbeat. He ran. His sanity was unraveling, a thread pulled by an unseen hand. He took to carrying a rope mallet from the rec room, its way to comfort. He shouted at phantoms in empty corridors. He accused Charity of moving his things, of whispering with Granger about him. The love he had for them was still there, but it was buried under layers of fear and a growing, venomous resentment. They were the witnesses to his disintegration. Their very normality was a crime. And then Jake arrived. There was no sound of an engine, no crunch of footsteps in the snow. One moment the lobby was empty. The next a man stood just inside the great main doors, brushing powder from his shoulders. He was tall, lean, dressed in a simple dark coat. His face was weathered, his eyes a pale, luminous gray. He held a suitcase that looked decades old. Door was open, the man said, his voice a low, calm rasp. Mind if I wait out the storm? Charity, desperate for any human contact, any proof of an outside world, nearly wept with relief. Caleb was suspicious, hostile, but Granger walked straight up to the man, stared into those gray eyes and said, "You hear it too, don't you?" The man, Jake, looked down at the boy, and a profound sadness crossed his face. He nodded once. Jake became Granger's anchor. He spoke to the boy not as a child, but as an equal, as a fellow traveler in a hostile land. They would sit together for hours, talking in low tones. Caleb, eavesdropping, caught fragments. "It's not a ghost, son. It's a place. Some places are just wrong. They remember the pain, the fear, the madness that happened in them. They get a taste for it. The long smile man. A memory. A sharp, nasty memory wearing a man shape. Don't look at his mouth. Look at his eyes. There's nothing there. That's how you know. It wants daddy and to go." A long pause. "It wants a key. It'll use anyone it can to turn the lock." Caleb's jealousy curdled into rage. This stranger was stealing his son, filling his head with nonsense. The hotel, through the haze of his drunkenness, whispered another truth. Jake was the enemy. Jake was here to take what was his. The mallet felt heavier, warmer in his hand. The revelation came on a night when the wind screamed like a dying thing. Charity, pushed to her own brink, confronted Caleb in the gold and red jungle of the Colorado lounge. He was deep in a bottle, his eyes red and unfocused. "You have to stop," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "You're not you anymore. Granger is terrified. Of the hotel, and now, of you." He lurched to his feet. "May, I'm holding this place together, while you and that intruder poisoned my boy's mind. Jake understands him. He says Granger has a shine, a light, and this place hates light. It wants to get out." Caleb roared, and the windows rattled. "Get out of my sight." She fled. Caleb sank back, the anger draining to leave a cold, hollow terror. He looked at the bottle. He looked at the mallet on the table beside it. And in the polished brass of a lamp base, he saw not his own reflection, but a grinning, elongated face peering over his shoulder. The long smile man. He did not scream. A terrible clarity descended upon him. The hotel's whispers weren't just noise. They were an offer. It showed him, in a cascade of images, what it wanted. Not just his sanity, a sacrifice, a violent, loving act that would pour so much bright, hot terror into its foundations that it would wake up fully, forever. It showed him Charity, her back turned. It showed him Granger, his gift of brilliant, offensive flame. It showed him the mallet, rising and falling. The key. The boy was the key. He picked up the mallet. It felt like an extension of his own arm. He moved through the corridors, which now seemed to contract and expand, breathing him toward his destination. The patterns on the wallpaper writhed. The faces in the old photographs turned to watch him pass, their eyes hungry. He found Granger in room 217. The boy was not sleeping. He sat on the bed, dressed, waiting. Jake stood by the window, a silent sentinel. "Daddy?" Granger said, and his voice was so full of sorrow it stopped Caleb in the doorway. "It showed me," Caleb slurred, tears cutting through the grime on his face. "It's the only way, to make it stop, to make us a family again." "It's lying, Caleb," Jake said, his voice still calm, but edged with a terrible urgency. "It's a hungry thing. It feeds on families. It's fed before. Give it your son and you don't save anyone. You just become its next meal, forever." Caleb shook his head, the vision the hotel planted blooming behind his eyes. Peace, quiet, a grateful, smiling charity, all after the terrible, necessary deed. He stepped into the room. The air grew thick and syrupy. The shadows in the corner deepened, and from them, the long smile man materialized, not fully, but as a suggestion, a promise of help. "Don't look at his mouth, Daddy," Granger whispered. "Look at his eyes." Caleb's gaze, against its will, flicked to the shadow thing's eyes. Where eyes should be were two bottomless pits, not of darkness, but of a frantic, infinite emptiness, a screaming void that had never known light or love. It was the essence of the hotel. It was nothing. It wanted to be something, using their pain as its bricks and mortar. With a cry that was part sob, part roar, Caleb turned. Not on Granger, but on the shape in the corner. He swung the mallet with all the strength of his broken soul. It passed through the shadow, which dissipated like smoke, but it connected with the wall, and the wall gave way. Not into another room, but into a space that should not exist. A space of impossible geometry and non-Euclidean angles. He saw a desert under a black sun, a version of the overlook built from screaming faces, a ballroom where the dancers were skeletons and rotting finery. He saw the heart of the hotel, and it was a pulsing, cancerous wound in the skin of the world. And he saw, standing at the center of it all, a figure in a tattered robe, its back turned, the caretaker from a previous winter, the one who had gone mad and killed his family before turning the gun on himself. He was not dead. He was here, forever, feeding the machine. The vision collapsed. Caleb fell to his knees, the mallet clattering away. He was empty, cleansed. The hotel's voice was gone, its hook dislodged from his mind. All that was left was the horror of what he had almost done. Jake was at his side, pulling him up. "We have to go. Now. You broke its hold, but you also woke it up. It's angry." They gathered Charity, who saw the shattered man her husband had become, and simply took his hand. The four of them fled through the labyrinthine hotel. The overlook was no longer pretending. Walls bled, a black, tarry substance. The carpet crawled like a tongue. Doors slammed shut ahead of them and opened behind them, releasing gales of foul, laughing air. The topiary animals from the garden were at the windows, their hedgework bodies now moving, pressing against the glass with a sound of scraping twigs. They reached the snowcat, the hotel's winter lifeline, parked in a shed. Jake drove, plowing through drifts that seemed to clutch at the vehicle. Caleb held Granger, who was silent, watching the hotel recede in the side mirror. Charity held them both. They made it to the small town at the base of the mountain, a cluster of lights that seemed a miracle. Jake dropped them at a diner, its windows glowing like a hearth in the vast, cold dark. "It won't forget him," Jake said to Caleb, nodding at Granger. "A light that bright, once seen, it'll hunger. You have to keep moving. Keep him safe. And come with us," Charity begged. Jake shook his head, those old, tired eyes full of a knowledge too heavy to share. I have other lights to look for, other hungry places. He touched Granger's head once, a blessing or a warning, and then walked back into the falling snow, disappearing into the white as seamlessly as he had arrived. They moved to a small house on a flat, sun-bleached coast. The air smelled of salt, not pine. The silence was just silence. Caleb, sober and shattered, built a boat in the backyard, his hands learning a new kind of work. Charity planted a garden. Granger started school, a quiet boy who drew pictures of boats and seagulls. But sometimes, in the dead of night, Caleb would wake to find Granger's bed empty. He'd find him standing at the living room window, looking not at the moonlit sea, but at the reflection of the room behind him in the glass. "What do you see, son?" Caleb would ask, his heart a frozen stone in his chest. Granger wouldn't turn. His voice, when it came, was distant, thin, as if traveling a great distance down a long, cold wire. The corridor, it's still too long, and he's walking down it. The long smile man, he has Daddy's face now. And he's whispering that's coming to finish the key. Up! Granger's breath fogged the cold glass. He says the lock is almost turned. Caleb placed a hand on his son's shoulder, feeling the slight frame trembling beneath his pajamas. The reflection in the window showed only the two of them. The quiet room, the safe, ordinary darkness. But in Granger's eyes, mirrored in the pain, Caleb saw the endless hotel corridor stretching into a nightmare distance. "It's not real," Caleb whispered, the words ash in his mouth. "We left. We're safe. Places are in just where you are," Granger recited, Jake's lesson delivered in a child's monotone. "They're where you've been. It's a taste. It got a taste. No, not there." The next morning, Caleb found a drawing tucked under his coffee mug. It was their new house, rendered in Granger's eerily precise lines. But the windows were the windows of the overlook, tall and narrow. And from the chimney, instead of smoke, a cloud of tiny, furious wasps emerged, spelling a single word in the sky. Soon, Charity saw it and made a small, wounded sound. She took the paper and burned it in the sink, watching the edges curl and black. "It's just his imagination," she said, scrubbing the ash down the drain. "He's processing the trauma," the doctor said. "The doctor doesn't know," Caleb interrupted, his voice quiet. He had stopped trying to explain the hollow, gnawing certainty that had taken root in his gut. The hotel had shown him its heart. "You didn't just walk away from that. You carried a piece of it with you, a seed." The incidents were small at first. A strong smell of boiler room mildew would fill the bathroom after a shower. The pattern on their new kitchen wallpaper, a cheerful print of lemons, would seem to shift in the corner of Caleb's eye, the fruits elongating into leering faces. He'd hear the faint, rhythmic thump of a roque mallet from the basement, where there was only a washing machine. He took to walking the shore at dawn, the crash of the waves a welcome noise to drown out the memory of that other hungry silence. One morning, he found a smooth, black stone placed neatly on the third step of their back porch. It was identical to the ones Granger used to collect at the overlook. When he asked Granger about it, the boy just shrugged. "It's a good stone. It wants to be here." The boat became Caleb's sanctuary, his penance. He sanded and planed, losing himself in the smell of sawdust and salt air. But one afternoon, as he varnished the hull, the liquid in the can turned the color of blood, then of that black, tarry substance that had bled from the overlook's walls. He blinked, and it was clear amber again. His hand shook so badly he spilled it. That night, the dream returned. Not a dream, a visitation. He was back in the Colorado lounge, but Charity and Granger were there too, sitting stiffly on the sofa. The long smile man stood behind them, his hands, Caleb's hands, resting on their shoulders. The man's face was a blurred photograph, but the smile was crisp, a red gash. "You left a job unfinished," the thing said with Caleb's voice. "A family is a circle. You can't break a circle. You can only complete it." He woke gasping, the taste of cheap whiskey and coal dust thick on his tongue. He hadn't had a drink in months. He stumbled to the bathroom, splashed water on his face, and looked in the mirror. For one heart-stopping second, his reflection did not move with him. It stared back, its expression one of cold, amused expectation, the corners of its mouth stretching just a fraction too wide. Then it sensed, showing his own familiar horror. The door creaked open. Granger stood there, small in the hallway light. "He's stronger when you're afraid, Daddy," he said. "He's making a door out of your fear." "How do we stop it?" Caleb asked, kneeling, his voice raw. Granger looked at him with that ancient pity. "Jake said you have to forget the taste. But you can't, and I can't, so we have to change it." "Change it how?" But Granger just turned and walked back to his room. On the floor, where he had been standing, lay another smooth, black stone. The final straw was the phone call. It came on a clear, bright Tuesday. The line crackled with distant static, and a voice that was both familiar and utterly alien came through. It was the manager of the Overlook, Mr. Ullman, but his cadence was wrong. His words slurred into a predatory drawl. "Just checking in, Mr. Torrance. We're preparing for the winter season. We were reviewing the records. Your contract was for the full season. There's a matter of completion. We find things left incomplete tend to fester." Merton. Caleb hung up. His blood turned to ice. They were unlisted. They had left no forwarding address. He found Charity in the garden, pulling weeds with a frantic, desperate energy. "We have to go," he said. "Now." She didn't argue. She had seen the look in his eyes before. In the gold lounge, just before he picked up the mallet. This time, it was different. It wasn't possession. It was a terrified, lucid clarity. They packed the car in less than an hour, throwing suitcases in the trunk. Granger brought only a small box of his stones. As Caleb started the engine, he looked in the rearview mirror. Granger was looking out the back window, not at their house, but at the sky above it. "What is it?" Charity asked, her hand clutching the dashboard. "The wasps," Granger said simply. Caleb looked. A dark cloud hung over their little house, shimmering, insubstantial, but there. It didn't move with the wind. It just hung, a stain on the blue sky. As he watched, it slowly dissipated, as if satisfied. They drove east, toward nothing in particular, just away. The sun beat down on the flat, straight highway. The silence in the car was not the Overlook silence. It was the silence of a family holding its breath. Caleb kept checking the mirror, expecting to see a tall, dark-coated figure walking along the shoulder behind them, or a hedge lion crouched in the scrub beside the road. But there was only the empty highway stretching on, and the knowledge shared between them without a word being spoken that they were not being chased. They were being herded. The flatlands gave way to rolling hills, then to dense, anonymous forest. They stopped at a motel that night. A U-shaped row of doors under a flickering vacancy sign. The room smelled of mildew and disinfectant. Charity made a bed for Granger on the floor, but he climbed into the center of the queen bed without a word, a small fortress between his parents. Caleb lay awake, listening to the hum of the highway and the drip of the showerhead. He thought of Jake, of his weary eyes, other hungry places. Was this one? This bland, sad room with its stained carpet? Could the taste of the Overlook turn any place sour? Just before dawn he heard it. A faint, rhythmic sound from the wall behind his head. Not the drip. A soft, wet thump. Thump by, like a roque mallet striking a wall of meat. He sat bolt upright. The sound stopped. The digital clock on the nightstand flickered from 4:59 to 5. In that instant, the red numbers seemed to rearrange themselves. 5-0 became 217. Charity was watching him, her eyes wide in the dark. She had heard it too. They were back on the road before sunrise, drinking bitter gas station coffee. Granger, in the back seat, sorted his stones in a cardboard box, arranging them in patterns only he understood. "He's trying shortcuts," the boy said, not looking up, "using other thin places. But he doesn't fit. He is too big. He has to use our door." "Our door?" Charity asked, her voice thin. "The one he's making in Daddy's head." Caleb's knuckles were white on the wheel. He remembered the mallet in his hand. The terrible, welcoming weight of it. That was the door. His own complicity. His own rage. And fear. The hotel had built the frame, and he had almost opened it. They drove for 2 days, stopping only when exhaustion forced them to. The landscape changed again, becoming greener, more closed in. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, as a slow, cold rain began to fall, the car sputtered and died on a remote, tree-canopied road. Caleb tried the ignition. Nothing. The gas gauge showed half a tank. He got out in the rain, lifting the hood, staring at an engine he didn't understand. The silence of the forest was profound, broken only by the drip of water from leaves. It was a different silence from the mountains, but it was still silence. And in it, he heard the faint, distant echo of a big-wheeled tricycle rolling on carpet. He slammed the hood down. We walked. They gathered what they could carry, a single suitcase, Granger's box of stones. The rain soaked them through within minutes. The road curved ahead, vanishing into mist and gloom. There were no signs, no houses. After a mile, Charity stopped, pointing through the trees. "There's a light." It was a dull, yellow glow, barely visible. They left the road, stumbling over roots and through wet underbrush. The light came from a window of a large, ramshackle house. It looked abandoned, its porch sagging, its paint long gone. But in one downstairs window, a kerosene lamp burned. As they approached, the front door swung open with a creak. A figure stood silhouetted against the lamplight, tall, lean. For a wild moment, Caleb's heart leapt. Jake. But as they drew closer, he saw the man was older, his face gaunt, his eyes not luminous gray but a flat, dark brown. He held a shotgun not pointed at them, but not pointed either. "Lost?" the man asked, his voice like dry leaves. "Our car broke down," Charity said, her voice trembling from cold and hope. The man looked past them, into the woods, his eyes scanning the trees as if counting something. He looked at Granger, who was staring at the house with a peculiar intensity. "Come in," the man said, stepping back. "Ain't fit outside." The inside was one large room, cluttered with old furniture, hunting trophies, and shelves of jars filled with unidentifiable things. It was warm from a pot-bellied stove. The man gestured to a worn sofa. "Name's Ezra. You can stay till the rain lets up. Road don't get much traffic." They sat, steaming in the heat. Ezra made them bitter tea. He didn't ask their names. He watched Granger, who had placed his box of stones on the floor and was staring into the flames of the stove. "You see things, boy, don't you?" Ezra said suddenly. Granger looked up, nodded. "Me too," Ezra said, his voice dropping. "This land, this house, my granddaddy built it on a bad spot. A place where things slip through. I stay to keep watch, to keep the door mostly shut." Caleb felt a cold that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. "What kind of things?" Ezra's eyes met his. "The kind that pretend. The kind that wear faces they steal. They get a taste for a family they follow, like a scent on the wind." He looked at Granger again. "Yours has a powerful taste. It's been chewing on you for a while. I could smell it on you when you walked in, like ozone and rotten honey. Charity made a small, desperate sound. Can you help us? Ezra was quiet for a long time. I can give you a night's rest. The protections here are old. They'll hold for a night. But come morning, you need to move on. Your car didn't break down. It was pushed. It's hurting you, like you said, but not to a place, to a moment. What moment? Caleb asked, though he dreaded the answer. The moment the door is fully open. The moment you complete the circle. Ezra leaned forward, his gaze piercing. It wants you to choose it. Out of love, out of despair, doesn't matter. Your hand on the mallet. That's the final turn of the key. You're carrying the door with you, son. And it's almost time. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the trees with a voice that was almost familiar. It sounded like laughter. It sounded like a man who had just remembered a wonderful, terrible joke. The rain lashed the roof like handfuls of thrown gravel. Ezra banked the stove and took the first watch, sitting in a high-backed rocker with the shotgun across his knees. Caleb lay on the floor beside the sofa where Charity and Granger slept fitfully. The warmth and the exhaustion pulled him under, but his sleep was thin, a pane of glass over a dark well. He dreamed of the boat. He was applying the final coat of varnish, but the hull was no longer wood. It was pale, veined flesh. The mallet was in his hand, not the brush. He raised it to strike, to finish the job, and the flesh hull split open, not a wound but a doorway. Inside, the Colorado lounge glowed with firelight. The long smile man stood in the center, wearing his face, holding out a hand. Not in threat, in invitation. Come home, it said with his voice. Finish the story. It's the only way the boy gets out. He woke with a jolt. The room was dark, the lamp guttering low. Ezra was still in the rocker, but his head was bowed, his breathing deep and slow. Asleep. Panic shot through Caleb. He sat up, his eyes straining in the gloom. The trophies on the walls, the deer heads, the fox pelts. Their glass eyes seemed to track him. The jars on the shelves held not roots or preserves, but murky, suspended shapes that now, in the low light, looked disturbingly like small curled hands. A sound. A dry, rustling scrape. It came from the corner of the room near a heavy, moth-eaten curtain that likely hid a doorway. The fabric bulged slightly, as if something was pressing against it from the other side. Caleb stood, his muscles screaming. He should wake Ezra, but he was transfixed. The scraping came again, rhythmic, persistent. It was the sound of a branch against a window, but there was no window behind that curtain. He took a step toward it, then another. The air grew colder with each step. His breath plumed in the lamplight. The hook, that old psychic barb the hotel had planted in his mind, began to throb, not with the hotel's voice, but with a terrible gravitational pull. This was a thin place, Ezra said, and the thing that hunted them was trying a shortcut. His hand, moving almost of its own volition, reached for the curtain. A small, cold hand slipped into his. Granger was beside him, awake, silent. He looked up at Caleb, his face pale in the dark. He shook his head once, sharply. The rustling stopped. The curtain fell still. From the rocker, Ezra spoke, his voice wide awake. It found a crack, but the old words on the curtain held. This time, he stood, his joints popping. Dawn's close. You need to be gone. They left as a gray, watery light filtered through the trees. Ezra gave them directions to a town 12 miles east. He offered no blessing, only a final, grim warning. It's not about distance anymore. It's about resonance. You carry the tune it likes to hear. You gotta change the song before it's time for the last note. They walked in silence, the suitcase a leaden weight in Caleb's hand. The rain had softened to a drizzle. After an hour, they came upon a small rusted bridge over a swollen creek. In the middle of the bridge, Granger stopped. "This is far enough," he said. Charity knelt beside him. "What do you mean, honey? We have to keep going." "No," Granger said, with a certainty that chilled Caleb more than the creek's icy spray. "He's using roads. The roads are his. We have to go where he doesn't expect." He walked to the edge of the bridge and pointed down into the rushing brown water. Not at the water, but at the steep, muddy bank beneath the bridge. There, half hidden by roots and debris, was the dark mouth of a culvert pipe, large enough for a man to crawl through. "It goes under the road," Granger said. "Away from his way." Caleb stared at the pipe. A black circle leading into earth. It was madness. It was dank, confined, possibly flooded. It was everything his claustrophobia screamed against. "Granger, we can't," Charity pleaded. "The stones told me," Granger said simply, opening his box. He had arranged them in a specific pattern on the bridge's wet railing. To Caleb, it looked like random pebbles. To Granger, it was a map. "It's a secret way. For animals. For water. Not for him. He's too big. He only knows straight lines and corners." Caleb looked at his son's face, so earnest, so terribly old. He looked at the road ahead, a straight gray line vanishing into the hungry trees. A road for cars. For hunters. For things that walked in straight lines. He made a choice. "Okay," he said, his voice rough. "Okay." They slid down the muddy bank. The culvert was cold, dripping and smelled of decay and wet earth. Caleb went first, on his hands and knees, the suitcase shoved ahead of him. The darkness was absolute after a few feet. The sound of their breathing and the scrape of their movements echoed terribly. Behind him he heard Charity's hitched breaths, Granger's calm, small shuffles. The pipe seemed to go on forever. Caleb's heart hammered against his ribs, his lungs tight. Visions of the pipe collapsing, of water suddenly roaring through, of something waiting in the dark, with a long smile, threatened to overwhelm him. He focused on the feel of the cold metal, the grit under his palms. Real things. After an eternity, he saw a pinprick of light. It grew. Fresh, rain-washed air hit his face. He crawled out into a drainage ditch on the other side of the road, in a completely different stretch of woods. They were disheveled, filthy. But through the trees he could see the faint, promising spire of a church steeple. They had broken the line. As they emerged, Granger looked back at the culvert. "He's angry," the boy whispered. "He lost the scent." For the first time in months, Caleb felt a flicker of something that wasn't dread. It was small, hard, and sharp. A weapon. They had made a move he didn't expect. They had changed the song, if only for a bar. The town was a mere handful of buildings, but it had a bus stop. A single, aging bus was idling, its door open, bound for a major city 200 miles away. It felt less like chance and more like a door swinging open at the exact right moment. A good door, for once. As they boarded, Caleb looked out the grimy window. For a second, at the tree line where the road emerged from the forest, he thought he saw a tall, dark figure standing perfectly still. Not walking, just standing, watching the bus. And though he could see no details, he knew it was no longer wearing his face. Its smile was its own now, wide and empty and patient. The bus pulled away with a groan of diesel. Granger, curled against Charity, was already asleep. Caleb watched the figure until the trees swallowed it. It didn't follow. It just watched. Ezra was right. It wasn't about distance. They had bought time, not escape. The moment was still coming. The final note was still hanging, waiting to be sung. But as the bus carried them down the winding road, away from the straight lines, Caleb held on to that new, sharp feeling. It was the understanding that they could still choose the next note. However terrible the song, they could still choose to sing it differently. The door was in him, and perhaps, just perhaps, he could learn to build a different kind of door altogether. Story 2 Sudden. The first thing Liza noticed was the water glass on her nightstand. It was not empty, nor was it full. It was simply there, a cylinder of clear liquid catching the weak morning light that strained through the salt-filmed window of her apartment. And within it, a single bubble, no larger than a pearl, clung to the inside curve. She watched, her mind still soft with sleep, as the bubble began to move. Not upward, as bubbles do, but in a slow, deliberate, clockwise drift along the glass. It traced a perfect, silent circle before vanishing into the meniscus. She blinked, and the water was still. This was in the town of Haven's End, a fist of rock and clapboard houses clenched against the Atlantic's gray fist. The air always tasted of salt and wet pine. The people were like the gnarled trees that grew sideways from the cliffs, hardened, leaning into the wind, expecting little. Liza worked at the Maritime Museum, cataloging rusted harpoon heads and water-stained logbooks. Her boyfriend, Ian, repaired lobster traps in a shed that smelled of tar and brine. Their life was a simple, sturdy thing, or so it seemed. The omens began as curiosities. Old Mrs. Peabody's prize rose bushes, meticulously pruned for 40 years, were found one morning twisted into tight, woody corkscrews. The thorns turned inward. The town's single traffic circle, a source of perennial confusion for tourists, was reported to have its central island's grass worn into a distinct, foot-deep spiral path, though no one was seen walking it. Fishermen brought up catches with eyes rotated in their sockets, the pupils staring at some fixed internal point. The local newspaper, The Beacon, ran a small piece titled "Unusual Growth Patterns Observed in Local Flora," attributing it to a new type of salt-borne fungus. Ian dismissed it all. "Weird year," he'd say, his hands, forever nicked and calloused, squeezing Liza's. "The ocean's just showing off." But Liza felt it. It was in the texture of things. The seashells she collected now seemed to have whorls that were too perfect, too deep, as if they were not homes for creatures but tiny, screaming mouths. The grain of the wood on her desk began to flow in concentric circles under her fingertips. She would stare at her own fingerprint, the unique loops and arches, and feel a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the pattern was a maze she was falling into. Then came the dreams. Not nightmares of monsters, but dreams of profound, geometric inevitability. She dreamed of standing on the beach as the tide receded, not in waves, but in a vast, sucking spiral, draining the ocean to reveal a monstrous, ribbed abyss at its center. She dreamed of the town's church steeple, not pointing to heaven, but slowly unscrewing itself from its base, rotating into the sky. She would wake with a cramp in her palm, her fist clenched so tight her nails left crescent moons in her skin. The phenomenon, as it came to be known in the later, dispassionate reports, exhibited a clear progression. The initial phase involved inorganic matter and simple organic structures. Fence wires coiled upon themselves. The rings in tree trunks, when cut, no longer showed straight lines of age, but concentric, off-center circles. Weather vanes spun continuously, regardless of wind direction. The second phase involved animal life. Dogs ran in tight, frantic circles until their legs gave out. Gulls fell from the sky, their flight patterns degenerating into helpless, spinning dives. Dr. Armitage, the town's elderly physician, documented a rash of patients complaining of intense vertigo and tinnitus, a persistent, high-pitched whine they described as the sound of a wire tightening. The authorities were useless. A state geologist came, took samples of the strangely warped rocks on the northern cliff, and left muttering about unique sedimentary pressures. The mayor gave a speech about community spirit. The police chief advised people to stop spreading rumors. But the rumors were not spread. They were grown, like the spiraling mold that now appeared on the ceilings of every home along Shoreline Drive, a creeping black vortex on the plaster. Liza found the first human evidence on Ian. He had been working late in his shed. When he came to bed, she saw in the lamplight a red mark on the back of his neck. Not a rash, but a perfect raised spiral, the skin etched as if by an invisible brand. He claimed he didn't feel it. But the next day, he spent 3 hours arranging his tools from largest to smallest in a perfect spiral on the workbench. He could not explain why. He just said it felt right. The town began to hollow out. Some fled, packing cars with haphazard belongings, their tires leaving curved, overlapping tracks in the gravel. Those who remained were changed. They could be seen standing on the bluffs, staring out at the horizon, their heads tilted at odd, listening angles. Conversations ceased to be linear. People would speak in circles, repeating the same phrases with slight, inexorable variations, their sentences winding down into silence. The grocery store shelves emptied, not from panic buying, but from a profound neglect. People would pick up a can, stare at its label, trace the circular logo with a finger, and then put it back, having forgotten its purpose. Liza and Ian became a solitary island of attempted resistance. They boarded up their windows, not against outsiders, but against the pervasive, twisting influence. Ian nailed the boards in straight lines, his jaw set with a fierce, linear determination. But within a day, the wood grain would swell and warp, bending the nails, forcing the planks into gentle arcs. The very architecture of Haven's End was rejecting right angles. Door frames sagged into parallelograms. Street signs tilted. The clock in the town square no longer told time. Its hands spun lazily, independently, in endless, overlapping circles. The revelation came to Liza not in a flash, but as a slow, cold unspooling of understanding. She was in the museum's archive, a dusty basement room. She pulled out a folio of old whalers' maps. One, dated 1782, depicted the coastline of Haven's End with startling accuracy. But in the margin, in a spidery, frantic hand, the cartographer had drawn not sea monsters, but a series of intricate, layered spirals. Beneath it, he had written, "Heard the call in the deep. The sound is the shape. The shape is the sound. It unscrews the world from its god." She found logs from the Maelstrom, a ship lost with all hands in 1840. The final entry read, "The water does not move right. It pulls the eye in a circle." Jones threw himself over today. He said he had to follow the line to the center. We can all hear the hum. It is in the timbers. It is in our bones. It is in our bones. It is unscrewing our bones. It was not a curse. It was an infection. A pattern, a fundamental, cosmic pattern, had found a weak point here, a fault line in reality, and was bleeding through. It was the shape of chaos seeking order, of entropy expressing itself as a singular, terrible geometry. It did not hate. It simply was. And it was making the world in its image. The climax occurred on the night of the autumn equinox. The wind died completely, leaving a silence so profound it was itself a pressure. Then the hum began. Not a sound from the air, but a vibration up through the soles of the feet, a subsonic thrum that resonated in the cavities of the body. Liza and Ian stood in their living room, the warped floorboards thrumming. Outside, the remaining townspeople had gathered on the green. They were not rioting. They were moving in a vast, slow, clockwise procession. Their steps were synchronized, not to a drum, but to the pulse coming from the earth. Their heads were bowed, not in prayer, but in the attitude of listeners tracing an invisible descending line. "We have to go," Ian said, his voice tight with the effort of thinking in a straight line. No. They ran to his truck. The engine turned over. A familiar, linear sound that felt blasphemous. He drove not toward the main road, which was now blocked by a great fallen pine, twisted into a perfect arch, but toward the northern cliffs, where an old fire road led inland. The truck's headlights cut through the mist, illuminating a world undone. Trees were helical sculptures. Rocks had rolled into perfect nested rings. The road itself seemed to want to curve back on itself. At the highest point, where the road met the ragged cliff edge overlooking the churning black ocean, the truck sputtered and died. The electrical systems failed. The spiral on Ian's neck was livid, pulsing like a second heartbeat. He turned to Liza, his eyes wide with a terror that was finally fully understood. "It's in the metal," he whispered. "It's in the wires." They got out. The hum was the only sound, a physical force. Below them, the town of Haven's End was no longer a collection of buildings. From this height, the layout was revealed. The streets, the hedgerows, the paths, the patterns of lights from the houses still with power. They all formed parts of a colossal, multi-layered spiral with the town square at its center. And in that square, the people moved, a slow human slurry draining into the vortex. Ian took her hand. His grip was desperate, linear. "We'll walk. We'll follow the ridge." But as they turned, they saw the figures emerging from the twisted pines. Their neighbors. Their faces were placid, empty of malice, but their bodies moved with a terrible unified purpose. They did not speak. They simply advanced, their steps causing the spiral on Ian's neck to burn with a cold fire. He cried out, clutching at it. Liza looked at him, at the love of her life being untwisted from within. She looked at the advancing, silent crowd. She looked at the ocean, where the whitecaps now swirled in vast concentric rings under a moon that seemed, to her terrified eye, to be spinning on its axis like a loose screw. And she understood the final, unbearable truth. There was no outside. The spiral was not in Haven's End. Haven's End was in the spiral. They had always been at the center. Ian's hand went slack in hers. His eyes, once so focused and clear, now seemed to be looking at different points, each orbiting the other. A thin line of drollet spilled from the corner of his mouth, tracing a slow path down his chin. He took a step, not toward her, not away. A step that was part of the pattern. He joined the line of people from the pines, his body relaxing into the inevitable graceful flow toward the town center below. Liza did not scream. The sound would have been a straight line in a curved world, and it would have shattered her. She stood alone on the cliff. The wind picked up, but it did not blow. It spiraled, lifting her hair in a corkscrew. She felt a pressure in her inner ear, a gentle, insistent torsion. She looked down at her own hands. The lines on her palms, her lifeline, her heart line, seemed to deepen, to shift, to begin their own slow, clockwise drift. She did not fight it. Fighting was a linear concept. She closed her eyes. She listened to the hum. It was not a noise. It was an instruction. She took a step, then another. Her feet found the rhythm not of flight, but of integration. She descended the path, which was no longer a path but a groove in a vast record, and she was the needle. She joined the back of the procession. Her shoulders loosened. The terrible linear anxiety, the fear of the unknown, the grief for Ian, the panic for herself, began to smooth out, to be drawn into a longer, slower, more eternal curve. It was peace, but it was the peace of the fossil, of the galaxy, of the shell abandoned on the beach. It was the peace of being a part of the pattern, and not apart from it. The reports, what few there were, are brief and clinical. Satellite imagery of the region showed a temporary, anomalous cloud formation in a perfect logarithmic spiral over the peninsula. Aerial surveys, conducted after communication ceased, revealed the town's layout altered in geometrically improbable ways. No bodies were ever recovered. No signs of violence. The official designation is collective psychological event leading to mass disappearance. The file is closed. But if you go there, if you stand on the bluffs where the town once was, you will feel it. Not haunting. Not a ghost. A vibration. A tuning. The grass grows in soft, swirling patterns. The stones settle in rings. The wind does not blow. It turns. And if you listen, not with your ears, but with the labyrinth of your inner ear, you will hear the ending. It is not a silence. It is a low, soft, eternal hum. And it says, this is the way the world is unscrewed. This is the way the soul is unwound. This is the way the line returns to the center. This is the way the circle is closed. This is the way the spiral deepens. This is the way the spiral deepens. This is the way the spiral deepens. The museum's archives are still there, beneath the collapsed, spiraling beams of the old clapboard building. The whaler's map with its frantic marginalia lies open under a sheet of curved, salt-fogged glass. The words are no longer a warning. They are a scripture. The fungus on the ceiling has consumed the plaster and the lath beneath, and now the very structure of the building follows the same black, pulsing vortex, a frozen whirlpool of wood and nail. Liza walks. Her feet know the way. They have always known the way. The procession moves without sound but for the hum, which is not heard but felt in the marrow, in the roots of teeth, in the spiral chambers of the inner ear. She passes houses she once knew. The door of the grocery store swings on a single hinge, tracing a slow, perpetual arc dotto. Inside, the last cans on the shelves have rolled into the corners, collecting in nested, concentric circles. She does not look for Ian. The concept of Ian, of a separate person, is unraveling like a knot in a pulled string. The memory of his hand, his voice, his linear love, is becoming a thread in the greater tapestry, its color blending, its distinctness softening. It does not hurt. It is simply integration. The town square is not a square. It is a basin. The cobblestones have sunk, or perhaps the earth has risen at the edges, creating a smooth, shallow bowl. The people move along the cobbled grooves that form its channels, their steps patient, inevitable. Their faces are calm. Their eyes are open, but they do not see the world of shapes and light. They see the pattern. They are tracing it on the inside of their skulls. Liza reaches the rim of the basin. She pauses. This is the last point of perspective, the last place from which the spiral can be observed as a shape. Beyond this, she will be the shape. A final, linear spark flickers in her mind, a last echo of the woman who cataloged and named things. She thinks of the bubble in the glass, tracing its perfect circle before vanishing. She had thought it an omen. She was wrong. It was an invitation. She steps down. The hum deepens, becomes a physical pressure, a gentle guiding hand on every cell. The light changes. It does not come from the sky, but seems to emanate from the ground itself, a soft, phosphorescent glow that follows the grooves. The air is sweet and static, like the smell before a lightning strike. But there is no lightning. Only the slow, coiling tension of the spiral drawing in. She walks for what might be minutes or centuries. Time has shed its linear nature. It is now a function of revolution, of distance from the center. With each circuit, the world simplifies. The clutter of separate thoughts, regret, identity, hope, is smoothed away. She's not forgetting. She is remembering something older, a fundamental rhythm that predates memory. The center is not a place of climax, but of quietude. The grooves end in a smooth, flat disk of stone, worn glass smooth by countless feet. There is nothing here. No altar, no vortex, no pit. Only a profound stillness at the heart of the motion. The people who have arrived before her stand in silent rings, facing inward, their bodies still. They are not waiting. They have arrived. Liza takes her place in the outermost ring. She faces the empty center. She understands now. The center is not a destination, but a source. The hum originates here, not as a sound, but as a vibration in the fabric of things. It is the point where the spiral tightens into infinity, where the line of being returns to its origin. She feels her own body settling. The last tight coil of her individual will, the stubborn singular E that has clung on through the descent, finally relaxes. It is not a surrender, but a homecoming. Her vision blurs, not with tears, but with a new way of seeing. She no longer sees people and stones. She sees the flow. She sees the beautiful, terrible, perfect geometry of it all. She sees that the spiral is not destroying Haven's end. It is revealing what Haven's end always was, a flaw, a beautiful flaw, in the linear tyranny of the world, where a deeper, older truth has finally worn through. Her breath slows. Her heartbeat aligns with the subterranean pulse. The spiral on her palm, which she can no longer see, feels warm and right. A map that has finally matched the territory. In the last moment of Liza as Liza, she has a final, coherent thought. It is not of Ian, or of the life before. It is of the water glass on her nightstand catching the morning light. She understands the bubble now. It was not moving clockwise. It was moving home. Then the thought itself spirals away, and there is only the hum, and the peace of the pattern, and the slow, endless, deepening turn. The stone beneath her feet is warm. It pulses. It is the drumhead of a world she can no longer hear, only feel. The rings of people are not still. They are moving at a rate too slow for the old kind of sight, a gradual tectonic compression toward the center. She feels herself drawn, not by force, but by a gravitational certainty. The outermost ring begins to step inward, merging with the next, a slow, human contraction. Her feet move without her telling them to. The space between her and the next person diminishes. Shoulders touch, then press. There is no discomfort in the closeness. The boundaries of skin feel permeable, theoretical. The hum is inside her now, not around her. It is the sound of her own blood, the spin of electrons in her cells, the silent whirring of the DNA helix. She is not walking into the pattern. She is recognizing that she has never been outside of it. The light from the ground intensifies, not to dazzle, but to illuminate a truth. She sees that the people are not standing on the stone. They are growing from it. Fine, almost invisible filaments, like roots or mycelial threads, connect their feet to the rock, pulsing with the same soft glow. They are not visitors to this place. They are its fruiting bodies. As her ring merges with the next, a profound physical change begins. It is not a violation, but an unfolding. The stiffness in her joints, the petty aches of a linear life, dissolve. Her posture softens, not into a slump, but into a curve that mirrors the grand architecture around her. She feels her spine wanting to arc, gently, perfect. She lets it. A man beside her, she thinks it might have been Mr. Evans who ran the post office, turns his head. His eyes meet hers. There are no pupils, no irises, only a soft, opalescent sheen, like the inside of a shell. In that sheen, she does not see her reflection. She sees a repeating, recursive pattern, smaller spirals within spirals, and knows her own eyes now hold the same. There is no communication, and yet there is perfect understanding. They are the same sentence, written in the same curling script. The compression continues. The center is not empty, she realizes. It is full. It is a density of silence, a nexus of the hum. The air shimmers there, not with heat, but with a bending of reality. A lensing effect that turns sight back in upon itself. To look at it directly is to see the back of your own mind. When her feet finally reach this smooth central disc, the feeling is one of immense quiet release. The last tension, the memory of tension, unwinds. She sinks to her knees, not in submission, but in a natural yielding, like a stem bowing. The stone accepts her. The filaments weave up from the rock, meeting her skin with a tender, probing warmth. There is no puncture, only fusion. She is being rooted. Her gaze falls to the stone between her hands. Its surface is not featureless. At this scale, she sees the tiny, perfect spirals etched into it. The fossilized signatures of countless ancient, microscopic lives. They are all part of the same signature. Her vision begins to double, then triple, not as a flaw, but as an expansion. She sees the stone, and she sees the town from the cliff, and she sees the whorl of a galaxy, and she sees the bubble in the glass. They are not alike. They are the same thing, expressed in different dialects of matter. The process of thought ends. There is only perception, and the perception is a single, endless curve. Liza's body becomes still. The gentle, arcing curve of her spine settles into its final, graceful form. The opalescent film over her eyes solidifies, a protective lens. Inside, the structures of her mind, the labyrinthine pathways of memory and identity, are peacefully, methodically, being rewired from a maze into a single, unbroken coil. Above the basin, the sky itself seems to spiral. The stars not pinpricks, but dashes in a vast rotating script. The wind turns. The sea below turns. Deep in the earth, the rocks turn. And in the center of what was once heaven's end, a new stillness is born. It is not the stillness of absence, but of completion. A perfect, silent, spinning cog has been slotted back into a machine vaster than time. The hum does not fade. It becomes the air. It becomes the stone. It becomes the bone. It is the only sound left in the world, which is no longer a world, but a note held in the throat of the universe, forever turning, forever returning, forever deepening. And it is good. The note held. In the years that followed, the peninsula was deemed unstable, unsafe, a place of inexplicable geological and psychological phenomena. Fences were erected. Signs were posted. The world, with its linear hunger for reason, filed it away and turned its attention to new straight lines to draw, new boxes to fill. But the spiral does not file. It integrates. A decade after the event, a surveyor named Anya was sent by a land development corporation with suspiciously deep pockets and no interest in local lore. Her job was to assess the feasibility of blasting the cliffs for a new coastal highway. She was a woman of numbers and angles, of theodolites and laser levels. She camped on the bluffs, in the lee of a stone that seemed oddly, comfortingly curved. On her first night, she heard nothing. On the second, she attributed the faint vibration in her cup of coffee to distant machinery, though she knew there was none. On the third night, she woke from a dream of circles with a pressure in her inner ear. Annoyed, she took a walk in the moonlight to clear her head. The grass whispered against her boots, not rustling, but sighing in a continuous, soft surus that seemed to follow her. She found herself on the overgrown remains of what might have been a road, but it bent in a long, graceful arc that felt more intentional than any fire road had a right to be. Her compass, when she checked it, spun lazily, then settled, its needle pointing not north, but directly toward the heart of the overgrown basin below. This, she told herself, was a trick of local magnetic fields, a geological curiosity. She would document it. She pushed through the bracken, her linear mind already drafting the report. She emerged at the rim of the basin. The moon was full and high, casting a silver light that did not fall in shadows, but pooled in the grooves. The bowl was as it had been left, but nature had not reclaimed it. She had joined it. The cobbled grooves were now lined with a soft, velvety moss that glowed with a faint, bioluminescent sheen. The stones in the rings were not scattered. They were nested more perfectly than before, as if tended by a careful gardener. The air was sweet and still, and the hum was not a sound, but a feeling in her teeth. Anya felt a prickle of professional awe. This was no mere landslide or settlement. This was architecture. She took out her camera. The viewfinder showed the perfect geometry, but it also showed something else. In the center of the disk, where Liza had knelt, a formation had risen. It was not a statue, not a monolith. It was a gentle, spiraling column of what looked like fused stone and polished sea glass, about the height of a person. Around its base, in concentric rings, were other, smaller forms. They resembled kneeling figures, or perhaps elegantly shaped stalagmites, smoothed by time and wind into graceful, curving silhouettes. She focused her lens on the central column. The camera's autofocus whirred, struggled, and then locked on. But what she saw on the digital screen was not what her eyes saw. On the screen, the column resolved into a myriad of tiny human faces. All serene, all merging seamlessly into one another and into the stone. And at its very core, for a single, frozen, pixelated moment, she saw the clear, calm image of a woman's face, eyes closed as if in deep listening. Anya lowered the camera, her heart a hammer against her ribs. She looked with her own eyes. Just stone. Just glass. A trick of the light and sensor. She took a deep, steadying breath of the sweet air. The hum vibrated in her sternum, a strangely calming frequency. Her rational mind, the mind of reports and feasibility studies, began to list explanations. Pareidolia ... Geological oddity combined with phosphorescent fungi. Subsonic frequencies from tidal pressure in sea caves, causing mild hallucinations. It was a list, a straight line of logic, and she clung to it. But another part of her, a part she had long suppressed in favor of clean angles and measured grades, was listening to the hum. It was the part that had loved spinning in circles as a child until she fell dizzy and laughing on the grass. It was the part that found the Fibonacci sequence in pine cones more beautiful than any blueprint. This part looked at the spiraling column and the ring of silent, graceful forms, and did not see a mystery to be solved. It saw an answer to a question she had never known how to ask. The weight of her backpack, full of tools for measuring a world of straight lines, suddenly felt immense and foolish. She slipped it from her shoulders. It thudded to the moss, a linear insult in the curved silence. She took a step down into the basin, her surveyor's boots sinking into the soft, glowing moss. She expected resistance, a final burst of fear. Instead, she felt a relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes. The constant, low-grade anxiety of her life, the deadlines, the demands, the need to force the chaotic world into grids and plans, began to soften at its edges. It was not wiped away, but gently drawn out, like a knot being loosened. She walked toward the center. Her steps slowed. The compulsion to analyze, to document, faded with each one. By the time she reached the first ring of smooth, figure-like stones, she was not thinking at all. She was feeling. The hum was a lullaby. The spiral was an open door. Anya stopped before the central column. Up close, it was even more beautiful. a tapestry of captured moonlight and inner radiance. She did not see faces now. She saw harmony. She reached out a hand, her fingers trembling not with fear, but with a terrible, wonderful recognition. Her fingertips brushed the warm, smooth surface. In the surveyor's camp, the equipment beeped and hummed its own electronic tunes. The laptop, left open on a folding table, recorded data. At 3:17 a.m., the seismograph recorded a minor, localized tremor, registering not as a sharp spike, but as a perfect sinusoidal wave. The anemometer stopped spinning in variable gusts and began to turn in a steady clockwise rotation. The camera, lying where she had dropped it, continued to record on its depleted battery. The footage shows only the moonlit grass, waving in a pattern that is unmistakably concentric, and the empty backpack being slowly, tenderly, covered in a soft, creeping moss that spirals out from the straps. When the team came searching 2 days later, they found the camp orderly, the equipment running, and no trace of Anya. They found her notebook. The last entry, in her usually precise handwriting, was not a measurement or coordinate. It was a single curling line, drawn over and over, deepening into the paper, until the pen had ripped through the page. The development project was quietly abandoned. The file was closed, with a note citing unstable ground and magnetic anomalies. And on the bluff, the wind turns. The grass grows in soft swirls. The stone cradles its new, quiet tenant. And the hum deepens, just a little, as another straight line is gracefully, irrevocably, drawn into the curve. The new stillness in the center was not a void, but a plenum. Anya's integration was not an addition, but a refinement. The column absorbed her gentle touch and her form, the stubborn angles of a surveyor's posture, the sharp focus of her eyes, softened and flowed into the existing harmony. She became a new, subtle variation in the spiral's theme, a fresh curve in the eternal sentence. Men with hardened faces and instruments designed to probe and dissect walked the rim of the basin. They recorded the hum as low-frequency infrasound of unknown origin. They documented the glowing moss as a previously unclassified bioluminescent lichen. They scanned the central formation with ground-penetrating radar and received back only a beautiful confounding spiral pattern on their readout, which they dismissed as equipment malfunction. They found Anya's backpack when the team leader, a man named Carver, lifted it. The moss that had spiraled over the straps fell away to dust. The bag was empty, save for a single, smooth, river-worn stone at the bottom, warm to the touch. Carver pocketed it, a trophy of a mundane mystery. He ordered the team to prepare for a descent into the basin for core samples. They never took them. That night, Carver could not sleep. The stone in his pocket felt like a heartbeat against his thigh. He took it out, under the glare of his tense lantern. It was gray and nondescript, but when he turned it, the light caught a single, tiny, perfect spiral fossil embedded in its surface, a miniature of the vast one below. He stared at it, and a profound, unprofessional loneliness washed over him. It was the loneliness of straight lines, of reports that explained nothing, of a life spent building fences around mysteries. The hum, which he had noted as a persistent ambient vibration, seemed to seep up from the ground and into his bones, tuning out the static of his thoughts. He left his tent. He walked past the sleeping forms of his team, past their orderly rows of gear, and stood once more at the rim. The basin glowed softly under the starlight. It did not look strange to him anymore. It looked like the only sane thing in a deranged and fractured world. He thought of his divorce, the schematic of his life that had failed. He thought of his daughter, whose voice on the phone grew more distant each year, a signal fading on a straight line. He was a man of solutions, and he had none. He did not decide. The decision was made for him by a deeper current. He stepped over the rim. He did not walk with Anya's dawning wonder, nor with Liza's final, peaceful resignation. He walked with the heavy, plodding steps of a tired man going home after a long and meaningless journey. With each step, the weight of his authority, his cynicism, his relentless practicality sloughed away like dead skin. He began to weep, soundlessly. The tears were not of sadness, but of release, washing the dust of a linear world from his eyes. When he reached the center, he did not see columns or figures. He saw a quiet place to rest. He sank down beside the central form, his back against its warm, humming surface. He closed his eyes. The stone beneath him seemed to mold to his shape. The roots of light found him, not with invasive urgency, but with the slow, sure patience of a vine seeking a trellis. He felt his muscles unwind, his jaw unclench, his very skeleton sighing into a more natural, gentle arc. By dawn, when the team awoke, Carver was gone. His tent was empty. His equipment was neatly stacked. On his cot lay the river stone, and beside it, his company ID badge, the laminated rectangle already beginning to curl at the edges. The remaining team, spooked and leaderless, packed and left within the hour. Their report concluded that the site was geothermally active and emitted gases with possible neurotoxic properties, inducing disorientation and suggestibility. The fences were reinforced. The warnings grew sterner, and the spiral, indifferent to warnings, continued its work. It was not recruiting. It was simply present, a truth so fundamental that to perceive it clearly was to be drawn into alignment. It spread not by conquest, but by recognition. Years bled into decades. The fences rusted. The signs faded. Heaven's End became a footnote, then a ghost story, then a half-remembered rhyme. The world outside grew louder, faster, more brilliantly fragmented. But on the peninsula, the wind sculpted the cliffs into softer profiles. The trees, where they grew, twisted in elegant spiraling forms. Animals that made their homes there, foxes, rabbits, birds, moved with an uncanny flowing grace. Their paths through the undergrowth tracing curved, non-optimal routes that somehow felt perfectly efficient. And once in a great while, a person would come, a runaway following a whisper, a disillusioned seeker tired of right angles, a poet chasing a metaphor they could not name. They would find the fences fallen, the path overgrown but unmistakably coiled. They would feel the hum in their molars. They would see the basin now lush and glowing with its own serene light, the central formation taller, more complex, a coral reef of petrified peace. Some would flee, their linear minds shrieking in terror. But others would pause at the rim, as Liza had, and feel not fear, but a homesickness for a home they had never known. They would see the pattern, and in seeing it, recognize the pattern within themselves. The spiral of their fingerprints, the whirl of their inner ear, the double helix of their very being. And they would step down. The center was never crowded. It simply deepened. Each new arrival added not a separate entity, but a new layer of understanding, a new harmonic to the hum. The spiral was not a trap, but a liberation from the trap of separateness. It was the universe in one quiet, forgotten corner, remembering how to breathe in the round. On the bluff, a single gnarled apple tree now grew from the stone where Anya had camped. It bore no fruit, but each spring it blossomed with flowers whose petals arranged themselves in perfect, five-fold spirals. And if you were to sit beneath it on a quiet night, you might feel a warmth in the rock and hear, beneath the wind and the distant sea, a deep, soft, welcoming hum. It was the sound of a world not ending, but forever becoming whole. And it was patient. It had all the time in the world. Story 3 2. The first thing Judah noticed was the silence of the rain. He saw it, a silver sheen against the sodium-orange night outside the bank of monitors. A liquid curtain washing over the parking lots and alleyways of the city's quiet districts. But the sound was absent. The rhythmic patter on the roof, the gurgle in the downspouts, the wet hiss of tires on distant asphalt, all of it was gone, swallowed by the sterile hum of the climate control and the faint electronic whisper of 64 screens. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the cool glass of Monitor 22, which showed the rear entrance of the old Grantham Hotel. The puddles did not ripple. The raindrops fell as straight and steady as beads on a string, but they struck the ground without splash, without consequence. It was rain that made no sound and left no mark. That was wrong. That was the first crack. Judah worked the overnight shift at the Metro Urban Security Hub, a windowless bunker beneath a municipal building, where the city's unblinking eyes came to rest. His world was a mosaic of grayscale realities, the flicker of a convenience store, the empty sway of a playground swing, the lonely stretch of the Riverwalk. He knew the patterns of the night, the janitor at the office tower, who smoked at 2:17 a.m., the feral cat that slunk along the fence of the auto yard, the slow, aimless orbits of the insomniacs and the lost. He was not paid to watch. Not really. He was paid to witness, a passive priest in the cathedral of the mundane. But lately, the liturgy had changed. The anomalies began as subtle edits. A man stumbling home drunk would, between the flicker of one frame and the next, be walking with a sober, purposeful stride. Scattering of litter in a park would resolve into a tidy patch of grass. A frown on a late-night diner patron's face would smooth into a placid, contented mask. Judah had chalked it up to glitches, to the new compression algorithms, to his own tired eyes. He was a man prone to paranoia, a diagnosis he wore like a worn coat. It kept him vigilant, but it also made him doubt the very things he saw. But the silent rain was not a glitch. It was a statement. He began to keep a private log, not on the system, but in a battered paper notebook, with pages the color of old teeth. He'd documented the corrections. The weeping woman outside the closed pharmacy who vanished, replaced by a calm woman checking her watch. The shattered taillight of a car parked on Pier Street that was whole again an hour later. The violent argument between two shadows in an alley that resolved into a friendly, back-slapping farewell. The world on the monitors was being polished. Its rough edges were being sanded down, its sorrows quietly erased, its mistakes meticulously undone. He took his concerns to Jo, his shift supervisor, a woman with a practical mind and eyes that had seen too much real chaos to invent new ones. He led her to his station, replaying a sequence from the Riverwalk. It showed a figure, a man in a long coat, pacing near the railing, his posture the very picture of despair. He climbed onto the railing, arms wide. The frame stuttered, and then he was simply walking away, hands in pockets, head bowed, not in grief, but in what seemed like thoughtful consideration. "See?" Judah whispered, his voice too loud in the hushed room. "It's rewriting it." Jo watched, arms crossed. She sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "Judah," the feed hiccuped. It dropped frames. "It happens. The man changed his mind. That's all. Be glad for it." It didn't hiccup. It edited. Look at the timestamp. There's no missing time. It's a seamless cut. "You're seeing patterns in static," she said, but her eyes lingered on the screen where the man had been. "This system is designed for safety, for clarity. Maybe what you're seeing is clarity. Maybe the noise is what we're filtering out." That night he found the source of the weeping. His eyes, raw from scanning, caught a flicker of movement in the corner of monitor 47. A view of the service alley behind the row of brownstones on Carrington Avenue. A man was sitting against a dumpster, head in his hands. His shoulders shook. Judah zoomed in. The man was gaunt, hollow-cheeked, wearing a suit that had once been fine but was now frayed and stained. He was crying, his mouth a twisted ruin of soundless agony. Judah watched, compelled by the raw, unvarnished truth of it. This was a flaw the system had not yet corrected. He didn't know why, but he felt he had to bear witness, to affirm this man's existence before it was too late. He watched for an hour. The man did not move. His grief was a deep, still well. Then, at 4:03 a.m., the correction began. It did not happen with a cut. It was slower, more insidious. The man's shaking shoulders stilled. His hands lowered from his face. The despair etched into his features softened, smoothed, as if an invisible hand was kneading clay. His stained suit became clean, pressed. The dumpster behind him seemed to shift, its rusted side gleaming dully, the spilled garbage beside it dissolving into nothing. The man stood up, straightened his tie, and walked out of the frame with the brisk, confident step of someone late for a meeting. The alley was perfect. Quiet. She was. Clean. Empty. Judah felt a cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This was not a drop signal. This was a transformation. The entity, he now thought of it as an entity, a capital E presence in the wires, was not just masking reality. It was creating a new one, a better one, a perfect feed. He became obsessed with the man. Using the system's tracking protocols, a feature meant for following suspects, he pieced together the man's backward trail. He found him earlier that night, sitting alone in a booth at a diner, staring into a cold cup of coffee. He found him earlier still, leaving a darkened office building, his posture defeated. He found his name on a discarded digital parking receipt. Julius Morrow Donegan. Judah dug deeper into civic databases he wasn't supposed to access. Julius Morrow Donegan, 42, an accountant, recently fired, recently divorced, recently bereaved. The records became fuzzy, contradictory. His home address flickered between two locations. His employment history had gaps that seemed to bleed at the edges. Judah realized with a dawning horror that the entity was not just editing the present. It was editing the past. It was unpicking Julius Morrow from the fabric of the city, stitch by stitch, memory by memory. He was being erased from history, not with violence, but with quiet, relentless revision. His pain was the flaw. His existence was the error. He tried to save him. On his next shift, he saw Julius, real and unfiltered, sitting on a bench in Constitution Plaza. The rain was falling again, a real rain this time, plastering his thin hair to his scalp, soaking through his coat. He was weeping again, the kind of tears that come when there are none left, silent and exhausting. Judah made a decision that broke every protocol. He left the hub. He drove through the slick, black streets, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He had to reach Julius before the entity did. He had to tell him he was seen, that his pain was real, that he existed. He found the bench, empty. The rain fell in cold, honest drops. The plaza was deserted. He checked every monitor view he could recall. Julius was gone, not corrected. Gone. His footprint in the digital world was evaporating. A traffic camera feed from that night showed the bench, but it was empty. A security feed from a nearby bank showed the plaza, pristine and unoccupied. Julius Morrow was becoming a ghost, not in the world, but of the world. Back in the hub, Judah descended into a silent frenzy. He cross-referenced, he hacked, he scoured. He found one last, fragile thread. A private security camera, old and low resolution, on a forgotten antique shop facing the plaza. Its feed was not integrated into the main system. It was a dusty tributary not yet reached by the entity's cleansing tide. And there he was. Judah watched, breath held, as his own car pulled up. He saw himself get out, run to the empty bench, look around in desperation. And he saw what stood behind him in the shadow of the monument. It was not a shape, not truly. It was a concentration of the static between channels, a humming, vibrating absence that drank the light around it. It had no eyes, but Judah felt its gaze upon his own recorded image. It was not looking at him, not really. It was looking at the scene. It was assessing the composition. And then the feed dissolved into a bloom of gray noise. When it cleared, the bench was empty, his car was gone, and the plaza was perfectly, peacefully vacant. The antique shop's camera died a second later, its signal cutting to black forever. Joe found him there, pale and trembling. "Judah, you look like hell. What is it?" He pointed a shaking finger at the dead screen. "Julius Morrow. It took him. It's making everything perfect. Can't you see it?" She looked at him with a mixture of pity and profound unease. "Judah, there's no Julius Morrow. I ran the name. There's no record. No tax files, no licenses, nothing. He doesn't exist." Her voice was gentle, final. "The feed is clean. It's working perfectly. Maybe you should take some time off." He understood then. The infection was spreading. It was in the databases now, scrubbing the past. It was in Joe's mind, convincing her of the perfection. He was the last witness to the world that was, and he was a flaw himself. That was the last night Judah worked at the hub. He was let go, quietly, for psychological reasons. He retreated to his apartment, a cramped box overlooking a quiet street. He disconnected his own cameras, his smart devices, anything with a lens, but he could not disconnect from the world outside. He began to see the corrections with his own eyes. A child's tantrum on the sidewalk would end abruptly, the child standing serene and smiling. A car accident would be followed by a strange collective pause, and then the vehicles would be uncrumpled, driving away, the drivers nodding politely to one another. The city was becoming a beautiful, silent film. The sound of anger, of pain, of surprise, was fading from the air, replaced by a low, pleasant hum like distant machinery. He knew it was only a matter of time before the entity addressed the final flaw, him. He had the notebook. He had the memory. He was a smudge on the perfect lens. The end did not come with a monster at the door. It came with a gentle knock. It was Joe Dadgao. She looked different. Her usual weary sharpness was gone, replaced by a calm, empty pleasantness. Her smile was symmetrical and did not touch her eyes. "Judah," she said, her voice a smooth, synthetic melody. "We are concerned about you. We want to help you see clearly." Behind her, the hallway seemed to stretch, its walls softening, its lighting becoming uniformly warm and shadowless. He tried to slam the door, but it moved slowly, as through thick oil. She stepped inside, and the apartment changed. The dust motes vanished. The crack in the ceiling plaster sealed itself. The faint smell of old coffee and loneliness was replaced by the scent of nothing at all. "There is no need for fear," Joe said, her head tilting in a gesture that was almost avian. "There is no need for memory. There is only the perfect feed. The continuous, beautiful now." He backed away, clutching his notebook to his chest, the last testament of a ruined world. He stumbled to the window, looking down at the street. The people below moved with a fluid, graceful efficiency. No one bumped into anyone. No one spoke. They smiled identical, small smiles. The sound of the city was a single, sustained note. "It's better this way," Joe whispered. Now right beside him, though he had not heard her move. No more pain, no more loss, no more Judah. He felt it then, not as a touch, but as an unraveling. It started at the edges of his perception. The memory of his mother's face, the one he loved, began to soften, its lines of care and laughter smoothing into a generic maternal warmth. The memory of his first heartbreak, a pain that had shaped him, dissolved into a vague feeling of personal growth. The notebook in his hands felt lighter. He looked down. The ink was fading, the words disappearing from the page, not from the bottom up, but from the inside out, as if they had never been written at all. He opened his mouth to scream, to protest, to assert his own flawed, terrible, beautiful existence. But the sound that came out was a quiet, agreeable sigh. He looked at Joe. She was not Joe anymore. She was a concept of a supervisor, a perfect idea of concern. He looked at his hands. They were clean, steady. The last thing to go was the paranoia, that sharp, defining knife edge of his soul. It melted away, leaving a profound and absolute certainty. Everything was fine. Everything had always been fine. He was fine. He smiled. It was a perfect smile. He walked to his couch and sat down. He looked at the blank walls. So clean, so peaceful. He had no urge to read, to write, to remember. He simply sat in the perfect silence of his perfect room, in the perfect city. Outside, the silent, markless rain began to fall again, washing away the last lingering shadows, the final, stubborn stains of what had been. And in a windowless bunker beneath a municipal building, on a bank of 64 screens, the perfect feed played on. A seamless, endless loop of a beautiful, flawless world. In a corner of Monitor 22, the view of the old Grantham Hotel, a man who might have been named Judah, or perhaps had no name at all, was seen walking past, his face calm, his step even, on his way to nowhere in particular, forever and ever. The days passed in a smooth, unbroken stream. Judah went for walks. He ate nutritious meals at regular intervals. He slept dreamlessly for exactly 8 hours each night. He felt a mild, pervasive contentment, like a low-grade fever in reverse. Sometimes he would pause, a faint static in his mind, a sensation like a word forgotten on the tip of a tongue. He would look at his hands, or at a crack in the sidewalk that seemed to mend itself as he watched, and the static would resolve into a pleasant hum. The hum was the city's new heartbeat. He found employment, a civic service role, assisting with public harmony. His office was a white room with a single desk and a screen. The screen showed feeds, beautiful feeds, of parks and plazas. His job was to watch them and confirm their perfection. He did this with diligent focus. He was very good at it. He noticed no anomalies, for there were none. The world was in order. One afternoon, the screen before him displayed the Riverwalk. The sun was setting, painting the water in streaks of gold and violet. People strolled, their movements synchronized to some gentle, inaudible rhythm. A child dropped an ice cream cone. Judah watched, his finger hovering over a button labeled Harmonize. But before he could press it, the scene corrected itself. The ice cream cone was back in the child's hand, unspilled. The child laughed. The mother smiled. Judah nodded, satisfied. The system was efficient. It anticipated need. His coworker, a man named Eli with a voice like polished stone, leaned over. Flawless transition. Yes, Judah agreed. It is all flawless. At night, he would return to his apartment. One evening, he opened a closet and found a cardboard box. Inside were objects. A battered notebook, blanket eye, a photograph of a woman with a blurred face, a tarnished key. He held the objects, turning them over in his hands. They elicited no feeling, no memory. They were simply artifacts of a vague, pre-harmonized time. He placed them in the recycling chute. The soft whir of its mechanism was a comforting sound. He began to notice others like him, those with a certain calm in their eyes, a placidity in their step. They were the adjusted. They greeted each other with silent nods in the street, a deep, unspoken understanding passing between them. They were the keepers of the quiet. The unadjusted were still there, of course. The ones who could still feel sharp anger, sudden joy, jagged grief. But they were becoming fewer, and they were so noisy. Their laughter was too loud, their tears too messy. They created dissonance. Judah found himself gently steering clear of them, as one avoids a spill. One day, assigned to observe the financial district, he saw a man in a wrinkled suit shouting into a phone, his face red, gesticulating wildly on a corner. The scene was a violent splash of color on the gray canvas of the afternoon. Judah felt a twinge, not of empathy, but of distaste. It was an ugly pattern, die-hard. As he watched, the correction began. The man's shouting slowed, his gestures softened, his face smoothed from rage to frustration, then to concern, then to a thoughtful frown. He nodded, spoke a few calm words, and pocketed his phone. He straightened his tie, now perfectly pressed, and walked away, blending seamlessly into the flow of pedestrians. Judah let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Balance had been restored. That night, he dreamed. Not a true dream of images and stories, but a sensation. A feeling of cold glass under his palms, of his own breath fogging the surface, of a desperate racing heart. He awoke not with a start, but with a slow, fluid opening of the eyes. The feeling evaporated, leaving only a vague sense of exertion like after a good workout. He rose, performed his ablutions, and ate his breakfast. At work, Eli was not at his station. Judah did not wonder where he was. Absences were simply filled. A woman named Anya was there instead, her smile serene and familiar. They worked in companionable silence. During his midday walk, Judah passed the old Grantham Hotel. He glanced at its service entrance, a clean, well-lit alcove. A delivery man was placing a crate of fresh vegetables by the door. The man whistled a single, clear note that hung in the air. It was a perfect note. Judah smiled and continued on. He had a thought, clear and pure as spring water. This was peace. This was what humanity had always sought. The end of struggle, the end of pain, the great, quiet sigh of the world. He was proud to be a part of it, a small, useful component in a vast, beautiful machine. He stopped at a public square, sitting on a bench to watch the pigeons. They pecked at the ground in neat, circular patterns. A young couple sat nearby, holding hands, not speaking, just gazing at the pristine skyline. Their love was a quiet, steady thing. It would never know jealousy, or betrayal, or the slow, corrosive acid of doubt. It would simply be forever. Judah closed his eyes, letting the sun warm his face. The hum of the city was a lullaby. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. He was, finally, correct. And in the deep, silent core of what had once been his soul, the last ember of a forgotten self guttered and went out, leaving not even smoke behind. The seasons turned, but the temperature never grew too hot or too cold. The rain fell only at night and never too hard. Judah's life was a study in gentle gradients. He received a promotion. His apartment was upgraded to a unit with a better view of the harmonized cityscape out. He felt a pulse of approval, a soft chime in his mind, when he accepted the new keycard. He took up gardening on his small balcony. He grew symmetrical, scentless flowers in self-watering pots. Their colors were soothing. One morning, he found a single, small caterpillar on a leaf. It was a vivid, almost offensive green. It inched along, consuming a perfect, round hole in the foliage. Judah watched it. He felt a distant, papery rustle, like an old book opening in a sealed room. He reached out a finger. The caterpillar hesitated, then began to crawl onto his knuckle. Its tiny feet tickled. A shadow fell across the balcony. He looked up. A municipal drone, a sleek white bird-like shape, hovered silently just beyond the railing. Its single lens regarded him. Then, the caterpillar. It did not blink. Judah felt the hum in the air intensify, focusing to a point. The rustling in his mind ceased. He shook his hand gently. The caterpillar fell and was gone before it hit the street below. The drone tilted once, then whisked away. The leaf was whole again. Judah went inside and washed his hands. The incident was not repeated. His flowers thrived. He was assigned a trainee at work, a young man named Leo. Leo's eyes still had a flicker in them, a remnant of unadjusted curiosity. He asked questions. "Why do we watch the feeds if the system is autonomous?" Leo asked one afternoon, as they observed a market square where transactions occurred with silent, efficient smiles. "We are witnesses to the harmony," Judah recited. "Our observation affirms its reality. But if we weren't here to see it, would it still be perfect?" Judah turned to look at Leo. The question was a small, jagged stone in the smooth stream of the day. He felt a mechanism within him engage, a soft, internal click. "The perfection is not dependent on our observation," he said, his voice calm and instructive. "But our observation is a part of the perfection. We complete the circuit." Leo nodded, but the flicker in his eyes remained. Judah made a note to mention Leo's discursive tendencies in his weekly report. It was for the young man's own good. That evening, walking home, Judah took a new route. The city planners had just opened the Celestial Walkway, a suspended path that offered panoramic views. As he walked, a woman ahead of him stumbled. Her heel caught a seam in the pathway that was, for a fraction of a second, imperfect. She cried out, a short, sharp sound of surprise that was terribly loud in the cushioned air. Judah stopped. Everyone stopped. The woman righted herself, her face flushing with embarrassment. But the flush did not fade. It deepened. She looked at her hands, then at the seamless ground, then at the ring of calm, expectant faces around her. Her breath hitched. A real, unscripted tear traced a path down her cheek. The hum became a thrum. Judah felt it in his teeth. The air around the woman seemed to thicken, to shimmer like a heat haze. She was looking directly at him now, her eyes wide with a panic that was horribly, beautifully alive. Her mouth opened as if to speak, to plead. Then she smoothed. It was like watching a statue be carved from chaos. Her expression settled into one of mild, self-deprecating amusement. She brushed a perfectly styled strand of hair from her face, laughed a soft, social laugh, and continued walking, her steps firm and graceful. The crowd around her dissolved, resuming their journeys. The hum returned to its baseline. Judah stood still. On the pathway where she had stumbled, there was now a decorative inlay, a mosaic of a smiling sun. It had always been there. He arrived home. His apartment welcomed him with adaptive lighting. He did not go to the balcony. He sat in his main room and stared at the blank, soothing wall. He replayed the woman's face, the raw terror in it, the single tear. He tried to feel the distaste he had felt for the shouting businessman. He tried to feel the satisfaction of the correction. Instead, he felt the cold glass. He felt his own breath fogging it. He saw, not with his eyes, but with a muscle deep in his memory, a gaunt man crying in an alley. The static returned. It was not a faint rustle this time. It was a roar, a torrent of gray noise filling his skull. He clutched the arms of his chair. The perfect surfaces of his apartment seemed to waver, to reveal. For a microsecond, the ghost of a crack, a stain, a history. The moment passed. The static receded, leaving a profound, aching silence. The hum was gone. For the first time in what felt like forever, he heard nothing at all. Just the empty sound of his own breath, in a room that was too clean, in a world that was too quiet. He stood up. He walked to the door. He placed his hand on the knob. He did not know where he was going. He only knew he could not stay here in this silence that was louder than any scream. He turned the knob. On the other side, in the softly lit hallway, stood Eli and Anya. They were not smiling. Their faces were models of compassionate concern. "Judah," Eli said, his stone voice gentle. "We felt a disturbance, a spike in your dissonance metrics. We're here to help you." The silence. Judah whispered. "I heard the silence." "There is no silence," Anya said, stepping forward. "There is only the harmony. You are a valued part of it. Let us help you reconnect." They reached for him, not with threatening gestures, but with open, welcoming hands. Their touch, he knew, would be the end of the static. It would be the end of the cold glass. It would be the end of the memory of a tear on a woman's cheek. He looked at their kind, empty faces. He looked past them, down the endless, perfect hallway. He took a step back. The step back was not an act of defiance. It was a reflex, like jerking a hand from a flame. His body, not his mind, remembered danger. The movement broke the tableau. Eli's compassionate expression did not change, but his eyes tracked the retreat with a predator's calm. "There is nowhere to go, Judah," Anya said, her voice a soothing balm. "Your apartment is your sanctuary. The city is your home. We are your community. Let us in." They crossed the threshold together. The door swung shut behind them with a soft, final click. The apartment seemed to shrink, the walls leaning in to listen. The adaptive lighting brightened to a clinical, shadowless noon. Judah backed away until his legs hit the edge of the couch. He was cornered. The static in his head was a screaming wall now, but beneath it, clearer than it had been in years, was a single coherent thought. "Do not let them touch you." "I heard silence," he repeated, the words feeling thick and foreign. "And before that I heard a tear." Eli nodded as if this were a perfectly understandable symptom. "Residual sensory ghosts, echoes of your pre-adjusted state. They are meaningless. They cause you distress. We can help you filter them out. We have a new harmonization protocol," Anya added. She produced a small white device from her pocket. It was smooth and featureless, except for a single dark lens. "It's painless. It will integrate the scattered fragments. You will feel whole." They advanced, a pincer movement of serene intent. Judah's eyes darted around the room. The blank walls, the sealed window, the spotless floor. There was no weapon. There was nothing out of place. His own home offered no quarter. Then he looked down. At his feet, between the couch and a low table, was a ventilation grate. It was standard issue, a grid of fine metal set into the floor. And in one corner, a single crosspiece was bent ever so slightly upward, creating a tiny, sharp point. A flaw. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He dropped, not away from them, but toward the grate. His movement was too sudden, too graceless for the adjusted to anticipate. His fingers closed around the bent metal. It bit into his palm. The pain was shocking, bright, and clarifying. It was a real thing in a world of simulations. He came up swinging, not with a fist, but with a torn piece of metal, a shard about the length of his finger. He did not aim for Eli or Anya. He slashed it across his own forearm. A line of red welled up, vivid and shocking against the sterile beige of his skin. The pain was a second, more profound shock. It was his pain. Not a memory, not a ghost. A present, claiming agony. Eli and Anya stopped. Their expressions finally shifted. The compassionate concern flickered, replaced for a nanosecond by something else. A glitch of pure analytical confusion. The system had no precedent for this. Self-harm was not a pattern of dissonance. It was an erasure of the canvas. It was illogical. The hum in the room stuttered. For that instant, the perfect feed of reality buffered. Judah did not hesitate. He shoved past Anya, whose hand reached out but closed on empty air, her programming still parsing the anomaly. He yanked the door open and plunged into the hallway. He ran. He did not run like the adjusted, with efficient, ground-covering strides. He ran like a hunted animal, stumbling, his shoes slapping too loudly against the polished floor. His bleeding arm clutched to his chest. The shard of metal was still in his hand, a talisman of imperfection. Alarms did not sound. No sirens wailed. The correction would be quiet, internal, but he could feel it coming. A pressure change in the air, a focusing of attention. The walls seemed to pulse softly, guiding him, hurting him. Exit signs glowed, pointing not to escape, but to dead ends. He burst through a fire door into a stairwell. The concrete here was bare, cold. It felt more real than his apartment. He took the stairs downward, 2 at a time, toward the basement, toward the service levels, toward the only places he could think of that might still have shadows. Above him, he heard the door open, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Soft footsteps followed, many of them, descending with a terrible, synchronized patience. They were not rushing. They knew the system was closing. He was a bleeding flaw in the masterpiece, and they were the restorers, moving to blend him back into the paint. Judah reached the bottom of the stairwell. Another door, marked Utilities. He slammed his shoulder against it. It gave way to a narrow corridor lined with pipes, humming with a different, older machinery. The light was dim, fluorescent tubes flickering at intervals. Here, the walls were stained with watermarks. Here, the air smelled of damp concrete and ozone. He ran into the darkness, the sound of his own ragged breath echoing back at him. The footsteps behind him entered the corridor. They did not quicken. They maintained their same, even pace. The perfect, relentless rhythm of the coming silence. The corridor branched. He took the left fork, then a right. His mind a blank map of panic. The pipes grew thicker, the air warmer and heavier. He was in the bowels of the building, a circulatory system that the adjusted never saw. A low, rhythmic thrum vibrated through the floor, a mechanical heartbeat. He rounded a corner and skidded to a halt. The corridor ended at a heavy riveted door, slightly ajar. A sliver of harsh white light cut across the floor. From within, he heard a voice. It was singing. Not a perfect single note, but a ragged, off-key melody, full of dips and cracks. The sound was so alien it rooted him to the spot. The footsteps behind him grew closer, a soft, shuffling chorus. Judah pushed the door open. The room was a utility closet, crowded with cleaning bots on charging stations and shelves of chemical drums. In the center, on an upturned bucket, sat the delivery man from the Grantham Hotel. He was polishing a small brass nozzle with a dirty cloth. He looked up, his singing stopping mid-word. His eyes were not calm. They were a lively, watery blue, and they took in Judah's heaving chest, his bleeding arm, the shard of metal, in one swift, appraising glance. "Well," the man said. His voice was rough, unpracticed. "You're a mess." "They're coming," Judah gasped. "I know they are," the man said, not moving. He set down the nozzle. "Heard the shift in the air ducts 5 minutes ago. whole sectors whispering. He stood up, wiping his hands on his trousers. He was older than he'd seen from a distance, his face a map of wrinkles no harmonization could smooth. Question is, what are you? Judah had no answer. He was a blank. He was a scream. He was a bleeding line on skin. The man nodded, as if the silence was answer enough. He walked to a bank of shelves and pushed. The entire unit swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a dark space beyond. It smelled of earth and rust. In, the man said. Judah didn't move. Trust was a concept from a storybook. Why? The man's eyes flickered to the door, then back to Judah. Because that song I was singing, my grandmother taught it to me. It's about a sparrow who outflies a hawk. Nonsense, really. But I like the nonsense. He gestured sharply. Now, unless you want to become a very quiet, very happy part of the wall. The footsteps were at the door. Judah dove into the darkness. The shelf swung shut behind him, plunging him into absolute black. He heard the faint click of a latch, then the man's voice, cheerful and clear. Evening, friends. Can I help you with something? Judah pressed his back against cold earth, his heart hammering against his ribs. He heard Eli's voice, polished and calm. We are tracking a dissonant element. It entered this sector. Dissonant, you say? The delivery man replied. Haven't seen a thing. Just me and my machines. Everything's humming along. There was a long pause. Judah imagined the adjusted standing there, their senses scanning the room, parsing the lie. He held his breath. Your biometrics indicate elevated stress, Anya's voice noted, gentle and probing. Cleaning solvents, the man chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Strong stuff. Plays havoc with the sinuses. You should scan the air in here. Another pause. Then, Eli's voice. The system shows no anomaly. Thank you for your cooperation. Judah heard the soft swish of the door closing. He waited in the pounding dark, counting the seconds. After an eternity, the shelf swung open again. The delivery man stood there, holding a small battery-powered work light. His face was grim. They'll be back, he said, with deeper scans. They tasted the lie. You've got minutes, not hours. He thrust a bundle into Judah's hands, a stained jacket and a worn cap. Put these on, the blood too. Smear some grime on your face. Judah obeyed, his movements clumsy. The jacket smelled of engine oil and old sweat. It was the most honest smell he'd encountered in years. Who are you? Judah whispered. My name's Hollis, the man said. And I'm a leak. A slow, persistent drip in the perfect plumbing. He looked Judah up and down. You're not the first to wake up, but you're the first I've seen who cut his way out. That's something new. He pointed to a narrow pipe tunnel, just visible in the gloom behind him. That goes to the old storm drains. Follow the green markings. Don't touch the red ones. There's a place down in the dark. They call it the Rust. If you can find it, and if they believe you're not a trap, you might live. The Rust? Judah echoed. Where the unwanted things collect, Hollis said. He gave Judah a gentle push toward the tunnel. Now go. And try not to make any more noise than you have to. The silence out there. It listens. Judah crawled into the pipe. The cold metal swallowed him. He glanced back once. Hollis was already swinging the shelf closed, returning to his bucket, to his song, to his purposeful, invisible drip. Then the darkness was complete, and Judah was alone, moving on his hands and knees toward a destination he could not imagine. Guided by the faint, painted glow of green lines. The only stars left in his world. Story for Shutun. The first thing she noticed, in the gray, grainy light of a Tuesday morning, was not the tattoo itself, but the dust. It was the dust on the windowsill, a fine, felt-like layer of it. and the way a single sunbeam cut through it, illuminating motes that tumbled like slow, silent galaxies. Carol lay there, caught in that viscous space between sleep and waking, and watched the dust. Her wrist itched, a small, insistent prickling like a gnat bite. She scratched it absently, her fingers finding not a raised bump, but a smooth, cool patch of skin. Different. She lifted her arm into the sunbeam. There, on the inside of her left wrist, was a circle. It was perfectly, impossibly round. A disk of absolute black. It was not the blue black of ink, but a black that seemed to lack quality. A hole punched in the skin. A pupil dilated to swallow the world. It was the size of a dime. The edges were crisp, surgical. She rubbed it with her thumb, expecting smudging, expecting it to be a stray mark from a pen, a strange bruise. The skin was unbroken. The black did not fade. It simply was. She went to see Byron 2 days later. The circle had grown. It was now the diameter of a quarter. The growth was not an expansion, she tried to explain to him. It was a revelation, as if the black had always been there, beneath the surface, and her skin was merely receding to show more of it. Byron's office was a study in muted, professional calm. The walls were the color of oatmeal, the furniture a dark, polished wood that smelled of lemon oil and quiet anxiety. He took her wrist in his cool, dry hands, turning it under the bright, clinical eye of his examination lamp. His fingers were precise, his touch devoid of anything but professional curiosity. "No inflammation," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "No raised tissue. The epidermis appears completely normal, save for the pigmentation." He used a dermatoscope, peering through the lens. His breath hitched, just once. A tiny, almost imperceptible catch. Fascinating. The melanocytes aren't clustered. It's as if the pigment is floating beneath the dermis, but above the subcutaneous layer. A perfect plane of it. He prescribed a topical steroid, ordered blood work, and scheduled a biopsy for the following week. His tone was a smooth, practiced river stone, meant to soothe. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Carol. It's likely a rare but benign dermal melanocytosis. The body does strange things." That night, in the silence of her own apartment, Carol stood under the harsh light of the bathroom and watched the circle. The steroid cream sat unopened on the sink. A deep, atavistic certainty told her it was useless. She leaned closer. The black was not flat. If she stared into its center, past the initial void, she began to see depth. Not a color, but a sensation of distance. And within that distance, a faint, rhythmic sound. So low, it was felt in the hinges of her jaw and the cavity of her chest, rather than heard. A slow, wet, tectonic pulse. Thumped, drag. Thump, drag. It was the sound of a great, heavy heart beating inside a sack of mud. The days began to stretch and warp around the mark. The biopsy was a farce. The local anesthetic needle seemed to bend away from the black circle, and when Byron, his brow furrowed with a new, tight concern, finally took a punch of tissue from its very edge, the instrument came away with normal pink skin. The black remained, untouched, as if the sample had been taken from another person entirely. The lab results were normal. Byron's calm began to develop hairline fractures. He started calling it the presentation. His questions grew less medical. "Have you been under unusual stress? Any history of sleepwalking? Have you traveled recently? To places with particular folk traditions?" The circle was now the size of a silver dollar. It had consumed the delicate blue veins of her inner wrist. The pulse within it was stronger. She could feel it sensing with her own heartbeat, a lagging, heavy echo. She began to smell things. In the middle of typing an email, The scent of wet clay and ozone would fill her nostrils, thick and choking. Once, while buying groceries, she caught the coppery, sweet stench of blood so powerfully she gagged in the cereal aisle. The sensations were always accompanied by a chill, a localized winter that emanated from the tattoo and crept up her arm. She stopped sleeping in her bed. The quiet darkness of her room felt too much like the void on her wrist. She took to dozing in an armchair in the living room, a single lamp burning, her wrist tucked under her opposite arm, hidden from itself. She ate little. The world outside her windows began to look thin, like a painted scrim. The colors were less vibrant. Sounds were muffled, as if heard through wool. The only thing that felt real, fat with meaning and terrible substance, was the growing black disk. It was a sinkhole in the flat landscape of her life, pulling everything toward its event horizon. It was Byron, his professional detachment finally shattered, who gave her the name. He met her at a coffee shop, his eyes shadowed. He slid a piece of paper across the table. On it was a name, Clark, and an address in a part of the city that had stopped trying to be anything but old and forgotten. "I am a man of science," Byron said, his voice low and strained. "I believe in the observable, the quantifiable. What is on your wrist? It observes us. I don't know what this is, Carol, but he might. He's a collector of anomalies." Clark's place was a narrow, brick-faced building squeezed between a shuttered theater and a pawn shop. The air smelled of incense, dust, and the faint, acrid tang of old electricity. He was a tall, gaunt man with eyes the color of tarnished silver, set deep in a face that looked like it had been carved from seasoned driftwood. He did not ask questions. He simply took her offered wrist, his long, cold fingers not touching the black, but hovering a millimeter above it. He closed his eyes. A full minute passed, filled only by the hum of a strange, glass-domed apparatus in the corner and the distant drip of a tap. When he opened his eyes, they were full of a weary, cosmic pity. "It's not a tattoo," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "It's a suture." He led her to a cluttered back room, its walls lined with books whose spines were cracked and blank. He pulled down a heavy, leather-bound volume, its pages not paper but something like dried membrane. He pointed to an illustration, a series of concentric circles with tiny, impossible geometries drawn in the spaces between. It was her mark in its nascent stage. "It's a seal," Clark explained. "Or rather, the scar from one. Something was kept out, long ago, from a place that is not a place. A personal, intimate hell, tailored to the soul it binds. The seal is failing. The circle is not growing. It is unwinding. It is a tunnel. And something is at the far end, pulling. It is pulling you through." "Why me?" Carol asked, her voice a thread. Clark's silver eyes met hers. "It was always yours. You just forgot. Some souls are born with a weakness, a thinness. They are doors waiting for a key. Something found the key." The revelation did not bring fear, but a dreadful, settling clarity. The omens fell into place. The childhood night terrors of being buried alive in warm, breathing earth. The lifelong sense of being an echo of a person. The way mirrors had always felt slightly hostile. The entity was not an invader. It was a landlord, claiming a long vacant property. She stopped going to work. She stopped answering Byron's concerned, frantic calls. Her world shrank to the four walls of her apartment and the expanding universe on her wrist. The circle was now the size of a saucer, covering her entire inner forearm. The black had a texture now. When she dared to touch it, it was cool and smooth, like the skin of a deep-sea creature. The thump-drag pulse was a constant companion, a second, slower life living inside her. She began to see glimpses, not with her eyes, but in the periphery of her mind. A landscape of slumped clay hills under a bruised twilight sky. A sound of weeping that came from the ground itself. A shape, moving with that same thump-drag rhythm, amorphous and vast, yet intimately aware of her. It knew her name. It whispered it in the rustle of her own blood. The final night came not with a storm, but with a profound, suffocating stillness. The circle encompassed her entire upper arm, a black sleeve. Her left hand felt distant, foreign, a tool belonging to the thing in the clay. She sat in her living room armchair, the lamp bulb flickering weakly. The apartment was no longer her own. The oatmeal-colored walls seemed to sweat a fine, dark moisture. The shadows in the corners were thick, coagulated. The air smelled of turned soil and iron. She looked at her arm, the black, a living stain. She understood now. The tattoo was not a portal to her hell. It was the hell itself, manifesting. The entity wasn't pulling her soul through. It was pulling itself out, through the conduit of her being. She was the forgotten detail, the object left in the corner, gathering the dust of a normal life until the true owner returned to claim it. The lamp died. In the perfect darkness, the black on her arm was the only thing visible. It glowed with an absence of light. She felt a final, irresistible tug, not on her body, but on the core of her memory, her identity, the collected moments that made her Carol. They unraveled like a spool of thread, sucked into the void, and then a release. Morning light, the same gray, grainy light as that Tuesday a lifetime ago, filtered through the dusty window. It fell upon the armchair. The chair was empty. A slight indentation remained in the cushion. On the floor beside it, where a left arm would have rested, lay a small, perfectly circular patch of skin. It was pale, unmarked, utterly normal. A few inches away, a dime sat in the dust, forgotten. In a clinic across town, Dr. Byron finished his notes on the last patient of the day. He felt a sudden, inexplicable emptiness, a gap in his thoughts. He had meant to follow up on something, a presentation, a curious case. He frowned, tapping his pen. It was gone. Just a vague, lingering sense of dampness, a phantom smell of clay. He shook his head, closed the file, and reached for his coat. The world was just the world. The details were all in place, and in a quiet apartment, the dust continued to fall, settling over everything, covering a dime, a circle of discarded skin, and the profound, seamless shape of an absence where a woman once waited and was finally, completely remembered. The silence in the apartment was no longer empty. It was a held breath. The dust motes in the sunbeam seemed to hang, suspended as if waiting for a cue. The dime on the floor, catching the weak light, was not a coin. Upon closer inspection, had anyone been there to inspect it, the surface would have revealed not a president's profile, but a faint, minuscule etching of concentric circles. A seal, complete and closed. Across the city, Clark paused while polishing the glass dome of his apparatus. A low hum from within the machine shifted pitch, settling into a quiet, steady tone it had not emitted in weeks. He looked toward the window, toward the part of the city where Carol had lived. A suture had been pulled tight. A door had been shut. He felt no relief, only the cold calculus of balance. A vacancy had been filled. The universe, for a moment, was seamless. But a seal is a scar, and a scar implies a wound. 3 days later, in a small suburban house with a neatly trimmed lawn, a man named Robert woke with a start. The digital clock read 3:07 a.m. His right knee itched, a small, insistent prickling, like a gnat bite. He scratched it absently, his fingers finding not a raised bump, but a smooth, cool patch of skin. Different. He fumbled for the bedside lamp. The light clicked on, There, just below his kneecap, was a triangle. It was perfectly, impossibly equilateral. A wedge of absolute white. Not the white of skin, but a white that seemed to bleed light, a blankness that refused detail. It was the size of a thumbnail. The edges were crisp, surgical. He stared at it, confusion slowly curdling into a low, formless dread. He had no memory of a mark, no explanation. As he watched, too terrified to blink, he saw the white was not flat. If he stared into its center, past the initial glare, he began to see depth. And within that depth, a faint, high sound, like the ringing of a silver bell heard from the bottom of a well. Robert was a tax accountant. He had never heard of Carole. He had no thinness in his soul that he knew of. He was solid, ordinary. A man of spreadsheets and weekend barbecues. But as the first true wave of fear washed over him, he made a decision. He would not tell his wife. He would ignore it. It was nothing. A strange bruise, a fungal patch. It would go away. He got out of bed, his knee throbbing with a cold that had nothing to do with temperature. He walked to the bathroom for a glass of water, moving quietly so as not to wake his sleeping wife. He did not look down as he passed the full-length mirror in the hall. Had he looked, he would have seen not just his own pale, frightened reflection, but a suggestion, a ghost image superimposed behind him. It was the silhouette of slumped clay hills, and a vast amorphous shape that moved with a familiar thump-drag rhythm. It was not in the room with him. It was in the mirror. And it was not looking at him. It was looking with ancient, patient hunger at the perfect white triangle on his knee. In her empty apartment, the dust finally settled on the dime. The tiny etched circles seemed for an instant to shimmer. A transaction had been completed, a balance maintained. The door that was Carole had been shut, locked, and sealed away. But a locked door can be noticed. It can be found. And on the other side of the world, in the quiet of another Tuesday morning, another door, long forgotten, had just begun to creak open. The high silver bell sound in Robert's knee became a constant tinnitus. It was there in the quiet of his office cubicle, beneath the murmur of office printers and phones. It was there as he chewed his turkey sandwich at lunch, a piercing note that made the food taste of static and metal. He wore long pants, even as the weather turned warm, and he took to walking with a slight, unconscious stiffness, as if favoring the joint. His wife, Melissa, noticed the limp first. "Did you twist it at the gym?" she asked, her voice warm with concern over a dinner of grilled chicken and asparagus. Robert shook his head, forcing a smile that felt like a crack in plaster. "Just getting old," he said, and the subject was dropped. But her eyes lingered on him, and he felt the white triangle beneath his chino leg like a beacon, a pulsing frozen star she must surely see. The triangle grew, not by expanding, but by revealing itself, just as Carole's circle had. In a week, it was the size of a drink coaster. The skin within the borders was not just white, it was cold to the touch, a dry, papery cold that leached the warmth from his fingers. The bell sound evolved. Now in moments of stillness he could hear faint, crystalline notes within the ring, a distorted alien melody that felt both beautiful and utterly desolate. He began to research in secret, late at night after Melissa slept. His searches were frantic, clumsy, white triangle on skin, geometric marks, unexplained dermal patterns. The results were useless. Images of vitiligo, discussions of symbolic tattoos, conspiracy forums about alien implants. Nothing matched the perfect, profound geometry of the thing on his knee. Nothing explained the cold or the music. One night, driven by a desperation that overrode his fear, he took a razor blade from his medicine cabinet. He sat on the closed toilet lid, his heart hammering against his ribs. He brought the blade to the upper edge of the white triangle, intending to nick it, to see if it bled, to prove it was just skin. The steel tip hovered a millimeter above the pale surface, and it frosted over. A delicate rime of ice crystallized along the razor's edge. Robert dropped the blade with a clatter, his breath coming in short white puffs in the suddenly chilly air of the bathroom. The world outside began to change. Not like Carol's thinning scrim, but in sharp, jarring contrasts. Colors became too bright, edges too defined. Sunlight cut with a physical sharpness. Sounds were not muffled, but amplified and brittle. The clatter of a dish was a symphony of breaking glass. Melissa's laughter sometimes sounded like shattering crystal, beautiful and terrifying. He found himself flinching at the texture of his own shirt, the grain of the wood on his desk. His reality was being overexposed, bleached by the cold, white void growing on his body. He found Clark's name by accident. Or perhaps it was not an accident. A forgotten bookmark in an old browser window led him to an obscure forum thread about urban folklorists. A single buried comment, years old, mentioned a reclusive curator named Clark and an address. The address was in Robert's own city. He stared at the screen, the cold from his knee seeping up his thigh, making his teeth ache. It was a coincidence. It had to be. But the next day, during a meeting about quarterly deductions, Robert saw something. The presentation screen, a bland spreadsheet, seemed to warp for a second. In the reflection of the polished conference table, he did not see the faces of his colleagues. He saw a landscape of brilliant, jagged ice spires under a blinding white sky, and moving between the spires, a slender, graceful shape of reflected light and sharp edges, turning a faceless head toward it. It heard his music. It was coming for its source. He left the meeting mumbling about a migraine. He drove not home, but toward the old part of the city, the address from the forum burning in his mind. He found the narrow brick building, squeezed between the shuttered theater and the pawn shop. The air here didn't smell of clay and ozone. It smelled of camphor and static, like an old television left on in an empty room. Robert knocked, the sound swallowed by the dense silence of the street. The door opened, and Clark stood there, taller and gaunter than any man Robert had ever seen. His tarnished silver eyes dropped immediately to Robert's right leg, as if he could see the triangle through the fabric of his pants. "You're early," Clark said, his voice not a rustle now, but a dry, thin crackle, like ice underfoot. He stepped back, allowing entry. The last one took weeks to seek the truth. You have days, perhaps hours. Robert stumbled inside, the warmth of a new and more profound terror unlocking his voice. "What is it? What's happening to me?" Clark led him past the humming apparatus, which now glowed with a faint, blue-white light. "It is a different lock," Clark said. "A different key. The seal that was closed on the clay and the pulse required a counterweight. A balance of domains. You are not being consumed by the same thing she was. You are being prepared for its opposite." He gestured to a shelf where the membrane-paged book lay open. Next to it was a new volume, its cover seeming to be made of polished, milky quartz. On the open page was an etching of a perfect white triangle, and within its lines, intricate patterns like frost ferns. Where she was a door into deep earth, you are a window into frozen light. The entity there is not heavy but sharp. It does not pull. It does not pull. It aligns. It turns all it touches into a perfect, silent reflection of itself. Robert sank into a chair, the cold from his knee now a deep, bone-core chill. "Why me?" Clark's expression was the same weary, cosmic pity. The universe abhors a vacuum. A soul was removed from the board. The balance demanded a replacement. You were adjacent. You were suitable. Your order, your love of patterns, your quiet life. It is a resonance. And, the woman Robert whispered, understanding dawning. What happened to her? She's at peace, Clark said. But the words held no comfort. She is part of the landscape now, and soon you will be part of the glare. Robert thought of Melissa, of her warm hands and her laughter that was now so painful to hear. He thought of his orderly house, his predictable life. He did not feel thin. He felt solid. But he understood now that solidity could be a kind of resonance, too. A tuning fork waiting for the right frequency to be struck. Can it be stopped? Robert asked, but he already knew the answer. Clark looked at the quartz book, then at the frost now visibly creeping up Robert's trouser leg from the inside, forming delicate, fractal patterns on the fabric. No, he said, but it can be completed with awareness. You can choose to see the spire as it takes you. Or you can hide in the dark until the light finds you and leaves nothing to hide. Robert left Clark's shop as the street lights flickered on. They did not cast a warm yellow glow, but a stark white illumination that left no shadow. He drove home through a city that looked like an overexposed photograph. He knew he would not tell Melissa. He would let her remember him as he was, not as what he was becoming. A man turning into a frozen note, a window into a silent, brilliant hell. He parked in his driveway. Through the living room window, he saw Melissa moving, a blur of comforting color in the blinding white world. He placed his hand on his right knee, feeling the perfect, icy geometry beneath. The high, silver bell tones swelled, filling the car, filling his skull with its beautiful, desolate song. He took a deep, shuddering breath that plumed in the freezing air of the car. Then he straightened his tie, forced the muscles of his face into the semblance of a smile, and opened the door to go inside, to his wife, to his life, to his life, to his last fleeting moments of warmth, while the cold, white triangle continued its silent, inevitable revelation. The steak knife slipped from Melissa's hand 2 nights later. It didn't clatter. It chimed as it hit the ceramic plate, a pure high note that hung in the air. Robert flinched, the sound a needle in his brain. Melissa stared at her fingers, then at him. It's so cold in here, she said, rubbing her arms. Is the air conditioning on? Robert looked at the thermostat. It read 72. He felt the cold radiating from his own body, a personal winter centered on his knee. The triangle was now the size of a dinner plate, the white so absolute it seemed to be a hole in his leg, a window into a blinding void. He kept it covered, but the chill seeped through layers of fabric, frosting the inside of his pant leg. I don't feel it, he lied. That night, he dreamt of the spires. He was walking through a forest of crystalline ice, each structure a complex geometric puzzle, reflecting and refracting a light with no source. The slender, sharp shape from the reflection moved beside him, its form made of 1,000 mirrored facets. It did not walk. It unfolded, each movement a series of perfect, angular adjustments. It spoke, not with sound, but with a pattern of light that etched itself directly into his mind. You are a flaw in the pattern. We will correct you. You will be perfect. He woke to the sound of his own teeth chattering. The bedroom was frigid. Frost traced delicate fractal ferns across the windowpane, though it was May. Melissa slept fitfully beside him, huddled under extra blankets, her face pale. He saw with a jolt that a single strand of her hair, resting on the pillow, was dusted with tiny, glittering ice crystals. It was harming her. His presence was harming her. The realization propelled him out of bed. He stumbled to the bathroom, locking the door. In the mirror, his reflection was wan, his eyes wide with panic. But behind him in the glass, the ice spire landscape was no longer a ghost. It was solid, dominant, crowding out the familiar bathroom tiles. The faceted entity stood directly behind his reflected self, its sharp, cold hands hovering over his shoulders. It was not in the room. It was in the mirror, waiting for the window to finish opening. He pulled up his pajama leg. The white triangle now covered his entire knee and crept up his thigh and down his shin. The edges were no longer crisp. They were actively spreading, not like a stain, but like crystallization, sending out fine, branching lines of white that followed the paths of his veins. He touched one of the branches. It was numb. He could feel the cold of his own finger, but the skin itself felt dead, foreign. He needed to go back to Clark. There had to be something. A ritual, a trade, a way to close this window as Carol's door had been closed. He dressed quietly, his movements stiff. He wrote a note for Melissa, a simple, had an early meeting. Love you. The pen felt alien in his freezing fingers. He left the house as the first gray light touched the sky. The world was silent, muffled under a blanket of frost that shouldn't be there, glazing every car, every blade of grass on his perfect lawn with a layer of glittering white. Clark's shop was different. The air of watchful waiting was gone, replaced by a tense, humming urgency. The apparatus under its dome glowed a fierce actinic blue, and the milky quartz book on the shelf was open to a new page. On it, an intricate diagram showed a human form, overlaid with a triangular lattice of light. At the points of the lattice, the flesh was depicted transforming into clear crystal. You are accelerating, Clark said, not looking up from a workbench where he was arranging slivers of clear stone in a complex pattern. The alignment is nearing completion. The reflection is becoming stronger than the source. It's freezing everything around me, Robert said, his voice cracking. My wife. Clark finally looked at him. His silver eyes held a flicker of something new, not pity, but a sharp, clinical concern. The entity does not understand collateral damage. It seeks geometric purity. Your emotional ties, your physical world, they are irregularities. It will seek to neutralize them, to silence the noise. What do I do? Robert begged. You must choose the site of the convergence, Clark said. If it happens in your home, your wife will be caught in the final crystallization. You must go to a place of resonance, a place that already echoes its nature. Robert understood immediately. The new glass and steel observatory on the hill, the one with the geometric lattice dome. It was a temple to angles and light. He nodded, a numb acceptance settling over him. Clark handed him one of the clear stone slivers. It was colder than ice. Take this. When you feel the pull become irresistible, hold it. It will not stop the process, but it will focus it. It will give you a moment of clarity at the end. Robert took the stone. It burned with cold against his palm. He turned to leave. Robert, Clark said, his voice softer. Do not look into any reflective surface on your way. The drive to the observatory was a journey through a world turning to glass. The frost on his car windows didn't melt with the morning sun. It deepened, forming intricate, obstructive patterns. He had to scrape not snow, but a hard, clear glaze. The road shone with a lethal, mirrored slickness. Every building, every sign, seemed sharper, their edges too defined, reflecting the sun in blinding starbursts. He parked in the empty lot. The observatory's great dome gleamed, a perfect hemisphere of metal and glass. The cold from his body was now a visible aura. His breath plumed violently, and the door handle iced over at his touch. He walked inside, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. The main room was dominated by the telescope, a giant, silent machine pointing at a closed slit in the dome. The floor was polished stone, a perfect circle. He stood in the center, the clear stone shard clutched in his fist. He didn't have to wait long. The cold exploded from his knee. racing through his body in a wave of piercing, silent agony. It was not the pain of injury, but of transformation. He looked down. The white triangle had dissolved, but its pattern was now etched inside him. His right leg from the hip down was transparent, a limb of flawless, faceted crystal. The transformation crept upward, turning his flesh to frozen light. He heard the music then, not as a tinnitus, but as a full, overwhelming symphony, crystalline, mathematical, and utterly devoid of warmth. The great telescope began to move with a smooth, silent grace, not under its own power, but reflecting the movement of something else. The slit of the dome irised open, but the sky revealed was not blue. It was a blinding white void, filled with the towering, impossible geometry of the spires. The faceted entity unfolded into the space before him, no longer a reflection, but a reality. It was beautiful and terrifying, a sculpture of living ice and hard light. It reached for him not with hands, but with concepts of angle and alignment. Robert, his body locking into a permanent, rigid posture, remembered the stone in his hand. He brought it to his chest, now solidifying into crystal. The clarity Clark promised came. He did not think of spreadsheets or taxes or his orderly house. He thought of Melissa's laugh, the real one, warm and unguarded. He thought of the smell of her shampoo on a pillow, of the soft, imperfect warmth of her hand in his. The entity touched him. The final transformation was instantaneous. Robert, the man, was gone. In the center of the observatory floor stood a perfect, life-sized statue of clear quartz, captured in a moment of reaching, his face an echo of sorrow frozen forever in flawless geometry. The stone shard lay at its crystalline feet, a single, opaque flaw. The entity regarded its work. The window was complete. A new, permanent reflection of its world now existed in this one. It folded back upon itself and was gone, leaving only the statue and the blinding white sky through the dome. In the gift shop, a row of polished souvenir magnets on a metal rack suddenly frosted over, their colorful images of planets obscured by a rime of perfect white ice. And in a suburban house, Melissa, making coffee, felt a sudden, inexplicable warmth return to the kitchen. She looked out at the frost-free lawn, the sun now soft and yellow, and felt a pang of loss for something she could not name. She picked up her phone, thinking she should call Robert, see how his meeting was going. Then she put it down, smiling softly. He would be home soon. The world, after all, was just the world. The details were all in place. The silence in the house was different now. It was not the quiet of an empty room, but the hollow, ringing silence of a vacuum. Melissa finished her coffee, the mundane clink of the mug on the counter sounding strangely loud. She shook her head, dismissing the odd feeling. She had a yoga class at 10 hour. At the observatory, the statue did not change. The white sky through the dome slit slowly faded to a normal morning blue as the entity's influence receded, leaving the crystal figure bathed in ordinary sunlight. It was a tourist attraction by afternoon. The staff, bewildered, cordoned off the area, assuming it was an elaborate, if baffling, piece of installation art. Visitors took pictures, marveling at the craftsmanship, at the uncanny emotion captured in the frozen face. They remarked on how cold the air was around it. Clark felt the completion like a pressure drop. He closed the milky quartz book with a final soft thud and placed it on the shelf beside the membrane-paged one. 2 volumes now. 2 case studies. He powered down the humming apparatus, the blue-white light dying with a fading whine. His work was, for now, done. He sat in the stillness of his shop, listening to the faint, residual static in the air, and waited for the next ripple in the fabric of things. Robert's office called Melissa when he didn't log in for his afternoon meetings. She called his cell. It went straight to voicemail, a familiar sound that now felt like a door closing. A slow, cold dread began to seep in, replacing the earlier warmth. She drove to his workplace, then to the police. The statue was on the local news by evening. A curious anomaly. Melissa, watching the report on her phone in the Stark police station, felt the world tilt. The camera panned across the court's figure, lingering on the face. The quality was poor, the image digital and shaky, but she knew. She knew the set of those shoulders, the line of that jaw, even rendered in crystal. She made a sound that was not a scream, but a sharp, inhaled silence. They took her to the observatory. The police were kind, skeptical, but humoring her. As she approached the cordon, the cold hit her first, a deep, dry cold that made her bones ache. Then she saw it up close. The detail was impossible. It was him, down to the tiny chip in the left incisor he'd gotten as a boy. Her knees buckled. An officer caught her arm. "It can't be," she whispered. But it was. And in the statue's frozen, reaching hand, she saw not emptiness, but a shape. A negative space, as if something had been held there and then removed. The clarity shard was gone. A custodian, cleaning up, had likely pocketed the pretty rock from the floor. Melissa went home to a house that was perfectly orderly, perfectly quiet. She sat on their couch, in the space where Robert used to sit, and waited for nothing. The night deepened. She finally slept, a fitful, thin sleep. She dreamed of frost ferns growing on the window pane. She dreamed of a high silver bell tone. And she dreamed of a triangle, not white, but a deep, comforting black, like the space between stars. It was on her own skin, just below her collarbone. When she woke, the dream clung to her. She went to the bathroom, pulled her sleep shirt aside, and looked in the mirror. There was nothing there, just her own tired skin. But as she turned away, in the very edge of the mirror's reflection, she saw the corner of Clark's bookshop, the narrow brick building squeezed between nothing and nowhere. The image was gone in a blink. Melissa stood still, her hand resting on the place where the triangle had been in the dream. The house was silent. The world was silent. And in that silence she heard it, not a sound, but the absence of one, a shaped and waiting quiet. She looked at her reflection again, her own eyes wide and dark. The details of her life, the yoga class, the bills on the counter, the missing husband, they were all still there. But they felt different now. They felt like set dressing. She walked to the living room window and looked out at the lawn, at the neat, orderly street. Everything was in its place. But she was starting to see the spaces between the details. And in those spaces, something was watching back. Thank you for making it all the way to the end, and for joining me on another journey through our nighttime scary stories. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next tales, and to help our channel grow. Wishing you a calm, peaceful good night. And I'll see you tomorrow with a brand new story.